This is going to be a bit different from the usual stuff you read around here. I know there's no shortage of stories about people getting cheated on, blindsided by someone they thought they could trust. But my story? It's not exactly that. See, I wasn't just the guy who got screwed over. In the end, I did some screwing over too. But let me tell you something, before you start thinking I'm just another asshole, I didn't get there on my own. I was pushed, pulled, and practically shoved into doing what I did. It wasn't entirely my fault. But hey, let's back up a bit. We gotta start somewhere, right? I figure a little context won't hurt before I dive into the madness. First off, I'm just an average guy. I'm not some genius, not some hero in a movie. I'm just a dude working a regular job, trying to make ends meet and keep some kind of balance in life. I've never been the type to seek out drama. I'm steady, predictable even. That's just who I am. Always have been. My name's not important, but my wife's? Lisa? Now, she's a different story. Lisa was the type of woman people noticed. She had this presence, you know? Like she could walk into a room, and instantly, everyone was drawn to her. It wasn't that she was drop-dead gorgeous, though she was beautiful. It was more about how she carried herself. Confident, quick-witted, sharp as a knife when it came to conversation. She had this energy that made people gravitate toward her. Hell, even when we first met, I was in awe of how easy things seemed for her. People just liked being around her. And why wouldn't they? She was funny, charming, and had this infectious laugh that could make you smile even if you were having the worst day. And her sense of humor? That was something else. She could roast you, tear you down with a single line, and somehow, you'd still end up laughing. It was like magic. Everyone loved her for it, her friends, our family, even my buddies. And I'll admit, in the beginning, I did too. But over time, that same humor? It started to wear thin on me. It's hard to laugh along when the joke's always at your expense, you know? She was the funny one in our relationship. Me? Not so much. I was the serious one, the guy who kept everything running smoothly, who made sure we stayed grounded. And for a while, that dynamic worked. She brought the spark, and I kept the fire from burning down the house. But her humor? Well, that humor came back to bite me in the ass. It played one hell of a cruel joke on me. So evil, so twisted, that I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't lived it. You won't either. Not until you hear what went down. It was just a regular evening. Nothing special. I came home from work, exhausted like usual. The grind was starting to get to me, but that's life, right? You work, you come home, you eat, you sleep, repeat. But that night, when I walked through the door, the house smelled warm, inviting. Dinner was already on the table. Something Italian, I think. She knew I liked pasta, so she'd always whip it up on nights like this when she felt in a good mood. The candles were lit, Lisa had a thing for atmosphere, and there she was, smiling like nothing was wrong, like everything was just peachy. We sat down to eat. We talked, like we always did. Just regular stuff. I asked her how her day was, she asked me about mine. She laughed at something stupid I said, her laugh, that damn laugh. I remember thinking everything was fine. I wasn't really paying attention to her mood, I was too busy stuffing my face, trying to shake off the stress of the day. But as the conversation went on, something in the air changed. It was subtle at first, just a shift in the way she was sitting, how her voice dipped a little. I noticed her leaning back in her chair, her eyes kind of narrowing. And then she hit me with it, out of nowhere. You know, she started, her voice casual, like she was talking about the weather. I've been feeling a little tired of us lately. I looked up from my plate, confused, like maybe I hadn't heard her right. Tired? I repeated, my fork hovering midair. What do you mean, tired? She sighed, like this was the most normal conversation in the world. I don't know, it's just, things have been feeling a bit stale. Like we're stuck, you know? I didn't know. I was completely blindsided. We weren't fighting, we weren't in some kind of deep rut, at least, not that I could see. We had our routines, sure, but I thought we were solid. Married for 7 years, you'd think we'd have this figured out by now. But apparently, I was wrong. So wrong. And then she dropped the real bomb on me. So, I slept with someone, she said, deadpan. Like it was no big deal. Like she was telling me she bought a new pair of shoes or changed her hair color. It made me feel better. But don't worry, I'm not gonna do it again. I couldn't process it. My brain just stopped. Everything went quiet inside my head. The words hung in the air like some sort of sick joke that hadn't landed yet. Did she just say that? Did she just tell me she cheated on me over dinner? Casually, like it was nothing. My mouth went dry. My hands tightened around the fork, and I could feel the metal bending under the pressure of my grip, but I didn't care. I stared at her, searching for any sign that she was joking, that this was another one of her stupid pranks. But there was nothing in her eyes, just cold indifference. And then, like she hadn't just ripped my world apart, she stood up, walked over to me, and kissed me on the lips. A quick, meaningless kiss. "Good night," she said softly, and without another word, she turned and walked to the bedroom, leaving me sitting there, completely paralyzed. I couldn't move. I couldn't even think straight. I stared down at my hands, realizing I had bent the damn fork in half. My chest was tight, and all I could feel was rage building up, filling every part of me. But instead of going after her, instead of demanding answers, I stayed rooted to my seat, fists clenched, my mind spinning with one thought: revenge. She thought she could just drop that bomb, kiss me, and go to bed like nothing happened? Like I wasn't supposed to react? Oh, I was going to react, all right. I was going to make her regret ever opening her mouth. But how the hell was I supposed to know it was all a joke? How was I supposed to know that her sick sense of humor would take things this far? As soon as she kissed me on the lips and walked off to the bedroom like nothing happened, I felt this surge of rage just burn through me. I couldn't sit there and stew in it, not with the way my mind was spiraling. So, without a second thought, I grabbed my jacket, threw it on, and walked straight out of the house. I needed to get out of there. I needed air, space, something to clear my head, but more than that, I needed someone to talk to. My first instinct was to call my best friend, you know, the guy I'd usually turn to when shit hit the fan. But as I was scrolling through my contacts, my thumb paused on someone else's name, my wife's friend. Let's call her Megan. Now, Megan wasn't just some random friend of Lisa's. I'd known her longer than I'd known my wife. We used to run in the same circles before Lisa and I ever became a thing. And if I'm being completely honest, there had always been something between Megan and me. Nothing serious, but I knew she liked me back then, before I got with Lisa. It was one of those things where the timing was never right. But I had a gut feeling, her feelings hadn't gone anywhere, not entirely. So, without really thinking it through, I called her. She picked up after a couple of rings, sounding surprised but not in a bad way. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, her voice casual, like we hadn't spoken in months. "Can you meet me?" I blurted out. "At the bar near your place?" I need to talk." There was a pause, a brief one, but she didn't ask any questions. "Sure. I'll be there in 10. That was it. No grilling me about why I needed to talk or what was going on. She just agreed, like she knew something was up. I jumped in my car and headed to the bar, my mind still racing with what had just gone down at home. When I pulled up to the place, I saw her immediately. She was already sitting at a booth, nursing a drink. Megan looked up as I walked in, her eyebrows raised slightly in surprise. "Where's Lisa?" I sat down, avoiding her question at first. "She's not coming," I said flatly. That got her attention. She leaned in a little, her expression shifting from casual to concerned. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." We ordered a couple of drinks, and once the alcohol hit my system, the words just poured out. I told her everything, what Lisa had said, how she casually dropped that she cheated, and how she acted like it was no big deal. At first, Megan didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, the shock, the disbelief. But the more she looked at me, the more she realized I wasn't lying. I could see it all clicking in her head. We kept drinking, the conversation getting heavier with every round. I could feel the alcohol dulling the edge of my anger, but it was still there, simmering under the surface. By the time the bartender gave us the last call, we were both pretty drunk. Megan, out of nowhere, leaned closer and said, "I have another bottle of wine back at my place, if you want to keep this going." I didn't even have to think about it. I nodded, and we left the bar together. Her apartment was only a short walk from the bar. We stumbled in, laughing about something I can't even remember now. The moment we opened that bottle of wine, though, I knew exactly where the night was heading. There was this look in her eyes, a kind of intensity, and I wasn't going to stop it. I didn't want to. It didn't take long. After a few glasses, things escalated. One minute we were talking, and the next, we were on her couch, hands everywhere, lips locked. And in that moment, I decided to do something I hadn't planned on at all. I pulled out my phone and started filming. Not the whole thing, just clips here and there. Megan noticed, of course, and at first, she wasn't having it. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice a little slurred but still sharp. She pushed my hand away. "It's just for me," I said quickly, trying to reassure her. "No one else will ever see it, I promise. It'll be fine." She hesitated but eventually caved. Alcohol, desire, and years of unresolved tension will do that, I guess. So, I kept the camera rolling for a bit, capturing just enough to satisfy whatever twisted part of me thought this was a good idea. Afterward, when it was all over, I sat up and told her I had to go. She looked at me, disappointed. "You're leaving?" she asked, a little hurt creeping into her voice. "Yeah, I should," I said, already feeling the weight of what I had just done. "It's late." She wanted me to stay. I could tell. But I wasn't about to spend the night in her bed. This wasn't going to be a regular thing, and I sure as hell wasn't about to complicate my life even more by sticking around. So I left. I called a taxi, and as I sat in the back seat, my head spinning from the booze and the sex, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. I'd done it. I'd taken revenge. But had it made me feel better? No. Not really. If anything, I just felt hollow. Like the night had filled a temporary void, but it wasn't going to fix anything. When I got home, it was late. The house was dark, and Lisa was probably asleep in the bedroom, completely unaware of what had just happened. I stood in the hallway for a minute, my mind racing, trying to process everything. And then, without a word, I headed to the couch and crashed there for the night. The next morning, I could already feel the tension in the air. You know that heavy, suffocating kind of silence that just tells you something's off? Yeah, that was it. I tried to shake it off as I dragged myself into the kitchen, half expecting Lisa to be all sunshine and rainbows, acting like last night never happened. But nope. She was sitting there at the table, her eyes narrowed and lips pressed together in a thin line as she scrolled through her phone. She didn't even look up when I walked in, just sipped her coffee, but I could tell she was pissed. Not raging pissed, more like that low-burn simmering kind of anger where you know she's just waiting to explode. I sat down across from her, pretending not to notice, but I could feel the weight of her eyes on me, practically drilling into the back of my head. We ate in silence for a few minutes before she finally spoke, her voice dripping with irritation. "So," she said, dragging the word out, "where the hell were you last night? You came home so damn late, and you didn't even come to bed." I could feel her eyes on me, waiting for an explanation, but I wasn't in the mood for her interrogation. Still, I knew I had to answer, but this time, I wasn't going to lie. She had started this mess, after all. I took a deep breath, trying to sound as calm as possible. "I was out," I said flatly, not giving her anything more to work with just yet. Needed some space to think. Her eyes narrowed, and she set her phone down, giving me her full attention. "Think about what?" "Because, from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were up to something." I glanced at her, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Yeah, I was thinking. About us. About how I'm a little tired of our relationship too." That caught her off guard. She blinked a few times, her brows furrowing in confusion. "Wait, what? You're tired? Since when?" I shrugged, keeping my tone casual, like it wasn't a big deal, even though we both knew it was. "For a while, I guess. And last night," I paused, letting the tension build in the room. "I did something about it." Her expression didn't change at first. She looked confused, almost like she thought I was screwing with her. Then she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, and smirked like she had caught me in a lie. "Oh really? You did something about it? What did you do, huh? Cheat on me?" I stared right at her and nodded. "Yeah. I did." The smirk stayed on her face, but her eyes were searching mine, trying to figure out if I was serious or not. "Oh, come on," she said, letting out a short laugh. "You're joking. What is this, your way of getting back at me for what I said last night?" I didn't break eye contact. "I'm not joking, Lisa. I cheated on you." Her smile faltered, but only for a second. "Sure, you did. With who? The waitress at the bar? Some random girl from work? Who?" I took another breath, knowing exactly what this was about to do to her. "No. Not some random girl. It was with Megan that did it." Her smile disappeared entirely, replaced by a look of disbelief. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open as if she couldn't quite process what I had just said. "Wait. What? Megan? My Megan? Are you serious right now?" I didn't flinch. "Yeah. I slept with her last night." She blinked again, then burst out laughing, though this time it was more out of nerves than humor. "Oh my God, you're kidding. You have to be. Megan? That's your big lie. What kind of joke is this?" I didn't say anything, just calmly reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the video. I pressed play and held it up for her to see. She looked at the screen, still smiling, still thinking this was some elaborate prank. But as the video started, and Megan's face appeared, her smile began to waver. Then the sound kicked in, our voices, the unmistakable noise of what we had done, and her expression changed completely. Her face went pale, her eyes widening in shock. Her hand flew up to her mouth, and before I could react, she smacked the phone out of my hand with enough force to send it clattering across the table. "You bastard," she screamed, her voice cracking as she stood up so fast her chair almost toppled over. "You fucking idiot. You slept with Megan? You're out of your goddamn mind." I stood up, my own anger rising to match hers. "Oh, so now I'm the asshole? What about you, huh? You cheated on me first. You don't get to play the victim here." She glared at me, her eyes wild, her breathing heavy. "I didn't cheat on you, you moron. It was a fucking joke." I froze. Her words echoed in my head, but I couldn't process them at first. "A joke? What are you talking about?" She threw her hands up in frustration, pacing around the kitchen like she was about to explode. I said it to mess with you. I was kidding, you idiot. I didn't sleep with anyone. I was going to tell you after you cooled down, but you stormed out of the house like a maniac before I could explain. The room started spinning. My brain struggled to catch up with what she was saying. A joke? You were joking, yes, she screamed, tears welling up in her eyes. I was fucking joking. I never cheated on you. But you? You just went and slept with Megan and filmed it? How the hell do you expect me to react to that? I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. All the anger, all the justification I had built up inside myself crumbled in an instant. I stood there, my mouth dry, my heart pounding, realizing just how badly I had screwed up. Lisa, I said softly, trying to reach for her. I didn't know. She cut me off, her voice cracking. I don't want to hear it. You've done enough. Tears streamed down her face now, and she looked more broken than I had ever seen her. You ruined everything, you asshole. You slept with my best friend. How am I supposed to forgive that? I had no words. There was nothing I could say to fix it. I didn't know, I repeated weakly, but the words felt hollow, useless. She shook her head, backing away from me. Just go. I don't want to see you right now. With that, she turned and stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her so hard the walls shook. I heard the lock click, followed by the sound of her sobbing. I stood there in the middle of the kitchen, feeling like my world had just imploded. I wanted to fix it, to apologize, but what could I do? I had fucked up. Badly. And now, there was no turning back. After Lisa locked herself in the bedroom, I knew I couldn't just sit around and wait for things to fix themselves. The guilt was eating me alive. I couldn't get the look on her face out of my head, the shock, the hurt. But at the same time, I was still angry. Angry that she had even made that stupid joke in the first place, that she pushed me to this. So, I grabbed my jacket again and went straight to Megan's place. I had to tell her everything. When I got there, Megan opened the door, her face lighting up when she saw me, at least for a second. I didn't waste time with small talk. I told her everything, from the moment Lisa confessed her joke to the second I showed Lisa the video. And as I spoke, I could see Megan's face shift from confused to furious. You're an asshole, she spat, crossing her arms, her expression hardening. You set me up. You didn't tell me this was all because of some sick revenge scheme. What the hell are you talking about? I shot back, my own frustration bubbling to the surface. You agreed to it, remember? You knew what we were doing. Yeah, I agreed because I thought it was just between us, she yelled, pacing around her living room, hands flying up in the air. I didn't know you were using me to get back at Lisa. Do you realize what you've done? I've lost my best friend because of you. I clenched my fists, trying to keep calm. It's not just my fault, Megan. You were there. You knew what you were doing. You're just as guilty. She stopped in her tracks and glared at me. You really are a piece of work, you know that? I've loved you since university, and this is how you repay me? By screwing up my life? The words hit me like a punch in the gut. I had no idea she still had feelings for me, not like that. For a moment, the anger between us fizzled out, replaced by this heavy silence. We both just sat down on her couch, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of everything. After a few minutes, Megan sighed and pulled out her phone. I'm gonna try calling Lisa. Maybe I can explain, make her understand. I don't know, something. She dialed, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried again, and again, but no luck. Lisa wasn't picking up, and at this point, I didn't know if she ever would. Desperation was starting to creep in. I felt like I was sinking, and no matter what I did, I couldn't pull myself out. I left Megan's place after a while and went back home, hoping to try again with Lisa, to apologize, to fix this mess somehow. But when I walked through the door, the first thing she said to me was, "I already called a lawyer." She didn't even look at me, her voice cold and detached. "I'm filing for divorce." I felt my stomach drop. It was like the ground beneath me had crumbled, and I was free-falling with no end in sight. "Lisa, please," I started, but she didn't want to hear it. "There's nothing more to say," she cut me off, her back turned as she folded laundry like it was just another day. "You made your choice. I'm making mine." I stood there for a moment, trying to think of what to say, but there was nothing. I felt like complete shit. I had lost her. There was no going back from this. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to Megan's place. I knocked on her door, and when she opened it, I asked if I could stay with her for a while. She hesitated, her eyes scanning my face, full of frustration and doubt. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said at first, crossing her arms again. I couldn't blame her. I had dragged her into this mess, too. She had her own shit to deal with now. But as I turned to leave, defeated, she called me back. "Wait," she said, softer this time. "All right, fine. You can stay. But just for a bit. This whole thing, it's a lot." And so, I stayed with Megan. The divorce process dragged on for about a month, and during that time, our entire social circle knew about what happened. Lisa made sure of it. She told everyone, every little detail, and our friends all picked sides. Some stayed neutral, but most of them sided with her. I couldn't blame them. During that time, Megan and I started spending more time together. What had started as a mistake, something fueled by anger and bad decisions, slowly turned into something else. We tried to date, to make sense of this new situation, but the more we tried, the more we realized that something wasn't right. There was this huge gap between us, like we were both too broken, too out of place to make anything work. She still had feelings for me, sure, but now they were tainted by everything that had happened. I felt it too. We tried to act like things were normal, but nothing was. Every time I looked at her, I couldn't shake the guilt of what we'd done. Every time she smiled, it was forced, like she was trying to convince herself this was okay. But deep down, we both knew it wasn't. I was stuck in this limbo, trapped between the wreckage of my marriage and this new, fragile thing with Megan that didn't feel real. And as the days passed, it became clearer that no matter how hard we tried to move on, neither of us could escape the mess we had created. We were out of place, both of us, and I had no idea where to go from there. Update: it's been a while since everything went down, and I figured I owe you all an update. After all the chaos with Lisa, the divorce, and that whole mess with Megan, I've had some time to reflect. I've grown up a lot, more than I ever thought I would, honestly. Megan and I, well, we tried to make it work for a while. We had a history, sure, and for a moment, it felt like maybe we could turn something messy into something meaningful. But the reality of it was, it just wasn't right. We grew up together in more ways than one, and for a while, we were each other's crutch during a time when everything was falling apart. But you know what really killed it? Our so-called friends. The judgment from everyone around us was relentless. People love to talk, to point fingers, like they're somehow better or above it all. They whispered behind our backs, made snide comments, and acted like we were some scandal they could gossip about at every chance they got. It was exhausting, and eventually, it just became too much. Megan and I sat down one night, after yet another awkward encounter with one of her friends, and we both knew. We knew this wasn't going to work, not with all the baggage, not with everyone's opinions hanging over us like a storm cloud. So, we made the call to end it. It wasn't some big fight or dramatic breakup. We just let it go. For both our sakes. Now, I'm in a different place, literally and figuratively. I've made the decision to move to another city. I'm packing up my stuff, getting ready to leave this town and all the memories behind. It's strange, but it feels like the right move. Like I need to get away from the mess, from the people who won't let me forget what happened, and just start over. I want to start my life from scratch. No more judgmental eyes, no more baggage from the past weighing me down. It's scary as hell, I won't lie. But there's something about a fresh start that gives me hope. Maybe this time, I can figure out who I really am, without all the mistakes and bad decisions hanging over my head. I'm not saying it'll be easy. Nothing ever is. But it's a step forward, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm ready for it. Here's to new beginnings. Update. Well, here I am, already settled into a new city. It's strange how quickly things can change when you really decide to leave the past behind. I found a job pretty quickly, too. I'm working in an office now, doing something totally different from what I used to. It's nothing fancy, just basic admin work with a little bit of project management on the side. It's a steady gig, and honestly, after everything I've been through, the normalcy is kind of a relief. I clock in, do my job, and clock out. No drama, no stress. Just the daily grind, and for now, that's enough. But, of course, life always has a way of throwing something unexpected at you. There's this girl at work, let's call her Anna. She's the kind of woman who lights up the room when she walks in, but not in an over-the-top way. There's just something about her. She's got this quiet confidence, you know? Not to mention, she's smart as hell and doesn't take crap from anyone. I catch myself looking her way more than I should, and I think she's noticed, but I haven't been able to say anything. I mean, how could I? I'm still carrying all this baggage from my past. The divorce, the fallout with Megan, it's all still there, lingering in the back of my mind. I can't help but feel guilty, like I don't deserve to try again. Part of me feels like I need to make peace with everything that happened before I can even think about moving forward with someone else. So here I am, stuck in this weird limbo. I really like Anna, but I don't know how to tell her. I keep thinking, what if I mess it up again? What if I'm still too broken to make this work? I guess that's why I'm asking you all, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you take the risk, or wait it out until you're sure the past won't screw things up? Anyway, I just wanted to check in and thank you for sticking with me through all of this. Your support has meant a lot, more than I can say. I'm still figuring things out, but it feels good to know there are people out there who've got my back. Here's hoping I can make something good out of all this. Update. I figured it was time for another update, and this one's a bit different from the last. I'm in a relationship with that girl from work, Anna. It's been going well, better than I expected, honestly. I took my time, though. I didn't rush into anything because I wanted to make sure I was ready. I've been working with a psychologist for a while now, really putting in the effort to work through the mess of emotions and heartache after everything that went down with Lisa and Megan. It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. The thing is, I realized I can't keep punishing myself for the past. Yeah, I made some serious mistakes, and yeah, it's taken a lot to come to terms with them. But I'm starting to feel like I'm finally moving forward, like I deserve to try again. And Anna? She's been patient, understanding, and just good. She knows about my past, and while I was nervous to tell her at first, she didn't judge me for it. That's rare. One thing that hasn't changed, though, I never did develop a sense of humor. Maybe that's just not in the cards for me, but I've learned to live with it. We laugh about it sometimes, especially since Anna's got that lightness to her that I admire. Maybe that's enough for both of us. Anyway, I just wanted to let you all know how things are going. I'm in a better place now, and it feels good to finally say that. Thanks for sticking with me through everything. Wishing you all the best, and good luck wherever life takes you.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I was sitting at the dining table, sipping my coffee when Kathy sat down across from me with an unusual expression on her face. I could tell something was coming, but I had no idea what it would be. Taking a deep breath, she said, I have been having an affair with my boss Alex. The words were blunt, without the hesitations or stammering he might have expected from someone making such a confession. She didn't seem apologetic or even guilty. Instead, she explained it as though it were a choice he simply needed to accept. I will make sure that you get your share of physical intimacy, she promised, as if it were some kind of consolation prize. I'll make sure you're not left out, Ben. But you need to understand. I felt a mix of disbelief and insult building in my chest. There was an absurdity to it that nearly made me laugh, but I held it back and looked her in the eyes. This woman I had been married to for 3 years was sitting across from me, calmly suggesting that we continue our marriage while she maintained an open affair. I wondered if I had ever truly known her. After a moment of silence, I couldn't hold back anymore. A short, dry laugh escaped my lips and I shook my head. Kathy, if you think I'm going to sit here and go along with this, you don't know me at all. You don't get to just throw your decisions at my face and expect that I'll accept your affair. I am not your doormat. You need to find yourself a divorce lawyer. She stared back at me, surprised by my response. Maybe she thought I would be passive, or maybe she thought I needed her enough to tolerate anything. But her expression changed as she realized I was serious. She hadn't expected me to be that blunt. As I pushed my chair back, ready to leave, Kathy's expression darkened. There was something menacing in her eyes, a sharpness I'd never seen before. She leaned forward, her voice low and steady. Ben, sit down. You don't get to just walk out on this conversation. I stopped and looked at her. She met my gaze, her lips curving into a cold, almost smug smile. You think you can just leave, find a lawyer, and be done with me? She said. No, Ben, that's not how this is going to work. I stared at her. Really? You think your threats will work? It will, she said, leaning in even closer. If you try to walk away from me like this, I will ruin you. Do you understand? I'll go to the police. I'll tell them you hit me, that you threatened me. Her words were calm, almost casual. They'll believe me, Ben. Who do you think they'll trust? A well-respected attorney, or some accountant nobody's ever heard of? She tilted her head, watching me. You think you'll just pick up and move on, but I'll make sure you have nothing left. I'll make sure you're begging to come back. I couldn't believe this was the same person I'd married. It was like I was staring at a stranger, someone who didn't care about destroying everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built. She looked at me as though she already knew I'd give in, as though she was certain I wouldn't dare to risk the nightmare she was threatening. So, here's how this is going to go, she continued. You'll stay, you'll play along, and you'll keep your mouth shut, or I will take everything from you and burn it to the ground. Your choice, Ben. I was still reeling from Kathy's threat when she leaned back in her chair, almost as if she'd made up her mind about something. She crossed her arms, a smug look on her face. Oh, and one more thing, Ben, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. I think it's time you meet Alex. He's coming over tomorrow. I blinked, barely processing her words. What, are you really that dumb? You heard me. She smiled, a twisted, mocking expression. He wants to meet you, and I want you to be on your best behavior. Be a nice boy for me, Ben. The humiliation cut deep, but I stayed silent, waiting for her to finish. I expect you to make him comfortable. Offer him a drink, maybe even a snack, she continued, as if she were dictating some normal household errand. Who knows? Maybe he'll even be nice to you. I clenched my fists under the table, the anger bubbling up, but I forced myself to hold my tongue. She was looking at me, daring me to push back, to say something, anything that would give her more power over me. Do you think it is a good idea, Kathy? What makes you think you can pull this off? I said with a calm voice. Kathy leaned in, her smile fading, replaced by a hardness I hadn't seen before. Because I can, Ben. Because this is my life, and I'll do what I want. And if you want to keep a shred of dignity, you'll do exactly as I say. I'll see you and Alex here tomorrow, and you'd better make a good impression. Kathy, have you heard of Newton's laws of physics? For every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. However, with me the action might be something that you may not like. Rest, it's your call. This is the last suggestion that I will give you. Talk to your lawyer, don't make it messy. This marriage is over. Walk away while I still allow you to walk. Your threats will never work on me, because I have an alpha male in my life. You are nothing. With that, she got up and left the room, leaving me there alone. It was clear. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a battlefield, and now I needed hit back. The next evening, I was sitting alone in the living room, nursing a glass of Jack Daniels, trying to steel myself for the absurdity that was about to unfold. I heard the front door open, Kathy's voice full of forced cheer as she greeted him. I took a long sip, watching as she led him into the room, her hand resting on his shoulder like he was some prized trophy. Then I got my first look at him. Alex was shorter than I'd imagined, fat. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest, and before I could stop myself, it slipped out. The whole thing was so ridiculous I could hardly believe it. This was the so-called alpha that Kathy had thrown everything away for? I looked him up and down, shaking my head, the laugh turning into a scoff. He was just 5 feet tall and shorter than Kathy. This leprechaun? I said, pointing at him, barely able to keep the smirk off my face. This is the guy you call an alpha male, Kathy? He does not even need to dress for Halloween. He can just wear a green suit and he will be a leprechaun. Kathy's smile wavered, a flash of irritation crossing her face, but she tried to hide it. Watch your mouth, Ben, she snapped, her voice low and cold. Alex is everything you're not. Confident, assertive. A real alpha man. Oh, really? I said, leaning back and taking another sip of my drink, feeling a rush of defiance. If this is what you think an alpha looks like, Kathy, maybe I was giving you way too much credit. Alex looked at me, glancing at Kathy as if he was looking for some kind of cue. I could see he didn't expect me laughing at him. It was hard not to find the whole scene a little comedic. Tell me, Alex, I said, unable to resist, how does it feel to come here, into my home, and play house with my wife? His face reddened, his attempt at bravado crumbling, and he shot another uncertain look at Kathy. Enough, Ben. Kathy hissed, her eyes blazing. I told you to be respectful. Respectful? I said, letting out a humorless chuckle. I'm supposed to be respectful? You bring this hobbit in here, throw him in my face, and expect me to roll over and play nice? I could see her seething, but it didn't matter. Alex's face turned red as he tried to regain his composure, but his voice was dripping with anger. Listen, Ben, he said, his tone sharp and cocky. You think you're going to just walk away from this? I don't think so. Kathy and I have talked it over, and we'll make sure you end up with nothing. In the divorce, I'll make sure she takes everything, right down to the shirt on your back. He took a step closer, a smug smile forming on his face. And by the way, after we're done here tonight, I'll be sleeping with her in your bed. I held my ground, meeting his gaze without a hint of intimidation. Really, Alex? You think you can just waltz in here, throw around a few threats, and walk away with my life? Trust me, he said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. We'll take the house, the car, your job's income, everything. And we'll make sure you regret ever standing up to her. I raised an eyebrow. The house? I asked, barely able to contain my laughter. That house isn't even mine, Alex. It belonged to my mother. I just live here. You won't get a penny from it. Alex's face faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, shifting to his next weapon. Fine, but we'll still take your job's income. Kathy deserves it, and I'll make sure you're paying her for the rest of your life. I couldn't help but smirk, taking another slow sip of my drink. Sorry to disappoint you, Alex, but I already resigned from my job. What? Alex's smug expression finally cracked, his eyes darting to Kathy as if she'd somehow betrayed him. He looked completely blindsided. That's right, I continued, feeling a surge of satisfaction. So, no assets, no job, no income for you to leech off. I guess that little plan of yours isn't quite as airtight as you thought. Kathy glared at me, clearly caught off guard and furious, while Alex stood there, struggling to process the situation. I could see the gears turning in his head, realizing that the payday he'd counted on was slipping away. I looked between the two of them, finally feeling in control of my own life again. So, Alex, I said, my tone calm but pointed, why don't you rethink exactly what it is you think you're taking from me? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you're the one who's got nothing. Alex's face twisted with a smug grin as he leaned in closer, his voice dripping with arrogance. You're not in charge here, Ben, he said, practically taunting me. I'm the alpha now, and you'll do what you're told. In fact, I think I'll take Kathy upstairs to your bed, right now. There's nothing you can do about it. I set my glass down slowly, my blood boiling as I looked him dead in the eyes. Alex, I said, keeping my voice steady, I'm warning you. Get out of my house. Right now. But instead of backing down, he laughed, a harsh, mocking sound, and before I could react, he slapped me across the face, hard. The slap stung, but the fury it ignited inside me was something else entirely. He straightened up, looking at me with a smirk. clearly enjoying himself. You really think you can stand up to me? He sneered. Guys like you are just all air and no substance. I'm the real deal, and I can destroy you, Ben. You're nothing. Men like me are in control, and I'll make sure you rot in jail if you try anything. You'll be begging for mercy by the time I'm done with you. The slap stung, but it gave me a smile. Ben felt the slap sting his cheek, and something in him snapped. All the humiliation, the rage, the months of disrespect, they boiled over, breaking through the restraint he'd tried to hold on to. He stood up from his chair, his fists clenched, his voice low and steady. You think you're the real deal, Alex? Ben's fist connected with Alex's jaw, and he went stumbling back, barely able to react before Ben hit him again, then again. With every punch, Ben let out the words he'd been holding back. You think you're the real deal, Alex? He said, a dark determination settling over him. Real men don't try to tear apart other people's lives. Real men don't walk into another man's home and act like they own it. And they don't ruin marriages for their own ego. You're nothing, Alex. Real men protect their families. Another punch landed squarely on Alex's ribs, and Ben heard a satisfying crack. Real men have integrity. Alex was gasping now, trying to put his hands up in defense, but Ben didn't stop. Each punch was a release, each hit an exorcism of the anger that had been building for so long. Finally, Ben picked Alex up in his hands, looked him in the eyes and said, I am no alpha or a beta. I am the man. With that, he hoisted Ben over his head and slammed him down on the floor. Alex was crumpled on the floor, bruised and beaten. Ben took a step back, breathing hard, his chest heaving as he looked down at the man who had thought he could come into his life and tear it apart. Kathy stood frozen for a moment, her eyes wide with disbelief as she watched Alex crumble to the ground, bloodied and bruised. Her hands trembled, rage and fear mixing inside her. Without thinking, she rushed at Ben, her fists flying, pounding uselessly against his back in a desperate attempt to make him stop. But before she could land another punch, a woman's firm grip seized her wrists, yanking her backward. Kathy let out a startled scream as she was pulled off balance, spinning around to face her attacker. The woman holding her was tall, with short-cropped hair and an intense, unwavering gaze. Her grip was unrelenting, like iron around Kathy's wrists. Kathy tried to struggle, but the woman was too strong. Her movements calculated, swift, and controlled. Let me go, Kathy screamed, jerking her arms, but the woman's hold tightened. No, the woman, Linda, said, her voice low and commanding. You're done. With an almost terrifying ease, Linda twisted Kathy's arms behind her, forcing her to her knees. Kathy gasped, unable to fight back as Linda used her body's weight to slam Kathy down onto the floor beside Alex. Linda wasn't done yet, though. She stepped back, assessing Kathy for a moment, and then, with savage precision, she began delivering a series of brutal blows. Her fists came down with unyielding force, landing against Kathy's chest and stomach. Her strikes a mixture of speed and power that only someone trained in hand-to-hand combat could deliver. Each punch knocked the wind out of Kathy, and she could barely gasp for breath between the hits. Kathy tried to shield herself, but it was useless. Linda moved like a storm, relentless and unstoppable. The former Marine was no stranger to fighting, and she showed it as she hammered into Kathy. Ben, still catching his breath, stood there for a moment, unsure of what had just happened. He turned to Linda, her stance strong, calm, and confident, as if she had just neutralized a threat with ease. I don't think she's going to be causing you any more problems, Linda said with a grim satisfaction, watching as Kathy lay there, gasping for breath. She's learned the hard way what happens when you mess with the wrong people. Ben thanked Linda for staying hidden during the confrontation and helping him out with Kathy as he could never raise his hand on a woman. The police and medics arrived shortly after Linda had finished with Kathy and Alex, their sirens wailing in the distance as they rushed into the house. Ben stood in the corner, trying to steady himself, watching as they took control of the scene. Alex was barely conscious, his face swollen and bloodied, while Kathy was sitting up, her eyes wide with a mix of rage and fear. Both of them were swiftly loaded into ambulances and carted off to the hospital, where the real fallout would begin. Once they arrived, the officers continued their questioning. Alex, still groggy from the beating, attempted to assert himself, despite the pain. He was sitting up on a hospital bed, his voice shaking but filled with defiance. I want to file a complaint against Ben, Alex demanded, trying to muster what little bravado he had left. He attacked me in cold blood, and I want charges pressed. The officer, a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense look, flipped his notebook closed with a slow, deliberate motion, his gaze never leaving Alex. "You sure about that?" the cop asked, his voice low, his tone suddenly colder than it had been. "You realize who you're talking about, right?" Alex, trying to regain some control of the situation, looked confused. "What are you talking about?" The officer leaned in, lowering his voice as he spoke. "Ben's a former biker, associated with a pretty notorious biker gang. The kind of people you don't want to mess with. If you file that complaint, you won't just be dealing with him. You'll be dealing with all of them." Alex's bravado began to crack. His eyes widened, and his throat tightened as the realization hit him. The cop didn't stop there. "This beating," the officer continued, a hard edge to his words, "it'd be a cakewalk compared to what might come your way if you make this a police matter. Are you man enough to take on all of them? Because I can guarantee you, if you push this, it's not just going to be Ben knocking on your door." Alex gulped, his hands shaking now. He glanced over at the officer, then back down at his own bruised and battered body. The image of Ben's fists, the way they had hammered him into submission, was still fresh in his mind. But now, the idea of dealing with an entire gang of bikers, people who probably had no problem taking things further than just a few punches, left him terrified. Alex's face paled. His eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape, but there was none. He couldn't stop thinking about what the officer had just said. Ben and his gang weren't people to be taken lightly. "No," Alex muttered, his voice trembling. "No, I won't file anything. Forget I said anything." His bravado had evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. The officer nodded, closing his notebook with a snap and standing up. "Good choice. I'd advise you to keep your distance from Ben and from anyone connected to him. You wouldn't want to end up regretting this further." Alex didn't respond. His mind was already racing, the fear of what might come next flooding his thoughts. He had no idea what he'd gotten himself into, but one thing was certain. This was far from over, and he wasn't ready to face the consequences of angering someone like Ben, or worse, his associates. Kathy stood outside the hospital room, her face bruised but mostly intact, a deep anger still simmering inside her. She was determined to confront Alex and make sure they both stuck to the plan. She had been humiliated and beaten, but she wasn't going to let Ben get away with it. She would file for divorce, destroy him, and leave him with nothing. That was the plan, at least. She walked into Alex's room, her steps purposeful. He was sitting on the bed, his face a mess of cuts and swelling, but his eyes were sharp. When he saw Kathy, he looked up at her, clearly still shaken from the beating he had taken earlier. Kathy was ready to lash out, to demand that they stay strong and finish what they had started. But as soon as she stepped inside, Alex's reaction was not what she expected. "Leave me alone, Kathy," Alex said, his voice hoarse. "I don't want anything to do with this anymore. I value my life. You've really gotten us into something we should have never been part of. It's bigger than I thought." Kathy stared at him, stunned. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, stepping closer. "We can still make this work. I'll divorce him, take everything." "No," Alex cut her off, his eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand. If you value your life, you need to drop everything, leave Ben, and get out of town. Now." Kathy blinked in confusion. "What are you saying? What do you mean, leave him?" Alex swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably on the bed. He hesitated for a long moment before finally speaking again, his voice trembling. "Ben isn't just some guy you can divorce and walk away from. He's connected. He was part of a biker gang, a really dangerous one. I don't know all the details, but I know enough. People like him don't just let things go. If you go after him, if you try to take anything from him, he'll come after you, Kathy. And trust me, it won't be a slap across the face. It'll be worse." Kathy's heart started to race. She'd known Ben had a rough past, but she had always assumed it was just that, a past. She had no idea just how dangerous his past really was. Alex was shaking now, the fear in his eyes palpable. "Ben's not just a regular guy, Kathy. I was stupid to think we could take him on. If you file for divorce and try to take anything from him, you'll be marked. You're dealing with a whole other level of danger. And it's not just Ben. You're going to piss off the whole gang. You won't get away. They'll find you. They'll make your life hell. You need to leave, and you need to leave now. No divorce, no nothing. Just go." Kathy stood frozen, her thoughts racing. Alex's words felt like a slap in the face, but the fear in his eyes was real. This wasn't some idle threat. Ben's past was something far more dangerous than she had ever realized. She had always seen Ben as weak, someone she could control, but now it was clear that she had underestimated him and his past. The man who had once seemed like the perfect victim was something far darker, something she had never anticipated. I didn't know, Kathy muttered, almost to herself. Her mind was spinning. She had made so many plans for revenge, for taking everything from Ben, but now? Now, she wasn't sure she could follow through. What Alex was saying made too much sense. Alex, Kathy said, her voice trembling. What do I do now? Alex's voice dropped to a whisper. You do nothing. You walk away, quietly. If you try to drag this out, if you try to take him down, you're not just fighting him. You're fighting everything he's connected to, and you'll lose. You need to leave him, and leave now, before it's too late. Kathy looked at him, her hands shaking. She was trapped in a nightmare she had created. The fear settled in deep, a cold, terrifying truth creeping over her. She wasn't the one in control anymore, and it was clear now. If she didn't listen to Alex, if she didn't just walk away and disappear, Ben's world was going to consume her whole. The atmosphere in town shifted in the days following Kathy's hasty decision. The sound of roaring engines filled the streets, 70 bikers, each on their massive machines, patrolling with a steady, intimidating presence. Their thunderous engines reverberated through every corner of the town, a constant reminder of the power that lay behind Ben's past. It was as if the very air had thickened with tension. Kathy, her resolve broken and her mind clouded with fear, wasted no time. She met with Alex's lawyer, signed the divorce papers, and walked away with nothing. No assets, no custody. The settlement was a stark reminder of just how little control she had left over her own life. Alex had assured her it was for the best, but deep down, Kathy knew she was leaving town not just to escape Ben, but to save whatever was left of her life. 5 days after signing the papers, Kathy was gone. She packed her things quickly, taking only what she could carry, and left without a word to anyone in town. She disappeared as swiftly as she had come, her name now just another whisper in the wind. But Alex was not as fortunate. Despite his earlier bravado, his encounter with Ben's world had only just begun. For the 7 days he spent in the hospital, recovering from his injuries, a constant presence lingered by his bedside. Every day, without fail, 2 bikers arrived during visiting hours. They never spoke to him. They never touched him. They didn't need to. They simply sat quietly, their gazes fixed on him, unwavering and cold. Every time he woke up, groggy and in pain, those 2 men were there, silently watching. It wasn't just a warning, it was a message. Each visit was like a reminder that Alex had crossed the line, and now he was at the mercy of forces far beyond his understanding. They didn't need to speak. Their presence alone was enough to keep him in a constant state of fear. The days dragged on, and Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he was being sized up, judged, not just for what he had done, but for what he might do next. And every time he looked up at them, he realized there was nothing he could do. His fate had already been sealed, and it was no longer in his hands after 7 days, when Alex was finally discharged from the hospital, knowing that he had narrowly escaped a fate far worse than anything he had ever imagined. He'd learned the hard way that not all battles were meant to be fought, and not all men could be intimidated. Some men had entire worlds behind them, worlds that didn't need to raise a finger to bring you to your knees. His trip from hospital to home was again a nightmare. 70 bikes escorted him. Alex's life after his release from the hospital was a slow unraveling. At first, he tried to go about his normal routine, but everywhere he went, he couldn't escape the ever-present eyes of the bikers. They were always there, lurking in the background, at the gas station, on street corners, in the shadows of alleyways. No matter how fast or far he tried to run, they were always one step behind, watching, waiting. At first, he thought it was a coincidence. Maybe it was just paranoia, a product of the brutal beatdown he had endured. But as the days passed, the reality set in. They weren't just following him, they were making sure he couldn't escape. Wherever he went, wherever he tried to hide, there they were, 2 or 3 of them, always just within his sight. Silent, unmoving, watching him like predators waiting for the moment to strike. Alex tried to summon the courage to do something about it. He thought about going to the police. He had an entire story to tell, about Kathy, about Ben, about the threats, the gang, the constant surveillance. But every time he tried to take action, something stopped him. It was the sight of the bikers that paralyzed him with fear, that deep, gnawing anxiety in his gut. He couldn't shake the feeling that even if he went to the cops, it would do no good. They were everywhere. Then, one day, just as Alex was heading to the local police station, something stopped him cold. He was walking down the sidewalk when he spotted a familiar figure across the street, none other than the town's police chief. But what caught Alex off guard wasn't just seeing him. It was the leather biker jacket the chief was wearing. The very same one that the bikers wore, the one with the unmistakable patch. Alex's heart dropped into his stomach. The realization hit him like a freight train. This wasn't just a local gang. This was their town. The bikers weren't just some rogue group of criminals. They were embedded in the very fabric of the community, with their reach extending into every corner, including the police force itself. He froze, staring at the police chief, whose face betrayed no emotion as he walked past. The chief didn't even glance at Alex. But the message was clear. There was no escaping this. The town was under the control of people who answered to a much darker force than Alex had ever realized. Alex's thoughts began to spiral. He could no longer ignore it. The bikers weren't just following him. They were controlling him, making sure he understood that there was no safe place, no way out. His every move was being watched, not just by the bikers, but by the very institution he had once believed would protect him. With no other options left, Alex knew what he had to do. He couldn't stay. He couldn't fight. Not against Ben's world. Not against the bikers who seemed to have infiltrated every part of town. He had no choice but to leave. That night, Alex packed what little he had left. He didn't tell anyone. There was no point. The bikers had won. They had broken him, cornered him, and now, they had made sure he had nowhere to run, no one to turn to. The last thing he could do was disappear, to vanish from this place that had been his home, before they made the decision for him. The next morning, he was gone, leaving behind everything he had once known. As he drove away from the town that had suffocated him, Alex couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. He was no longer hounded, no longer watched, but at the same time, he knew that wherever he went, wherever he tried to hide, the shadows would always be there, waiting. The bikers had marked him, and Ben's world, with its endless reach, would never let him forget it. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
John Watson's life wasn't always marked by tension and disillusionment. There was a time when everything seemed full of promise. Growing up in a tough neighborhood, he had to make hard choices to survive. His mother married Tim Murphy, a strict cop who kept John from falling into a life of crime. Though John initially resented Tim, he later realized that Tim's influence steered him toward academic success. He transformed from a rebellious teen into a serious student, eventually discovering a passion for history. John's academic achievements led to a promising career, and he soon met Esther Prynne, a lively law student. They quickly fell in love, moving in together and planning a future. John was sure they were destined for a happy marriage, but the pressures of their careers began to strain their relationship, leading to an unexpected rift. On a gloomy autumn day, the overcast sky matched John Watson's mood. He unfolded his tall frame from the car and headed to the saloon, seeking refuge from the week's stress. A colleague's sudden resignation had left him scrambling for a replacement, with 3 failed interviews only adding to his frustration. Students were also upset over delayed textbooks, but what weighed most heavily on him was the growing tension in his marriage. "Hi, Professor. Haven't seen you in a while." Chester, the bartender, greeted him quietly. "Hi, Chester. I'll have a scotch and water," John replied, noting it was just after 4 p.m. As he waited, John's eyes wandered around the familiar old saloon, a place that had been his retreat since graduate school. His mind drifted back to when he was finishing his doctorate in American history. His manuscript on Henry Clay was set to be published, and he had just been offered a teaching position. Though the pay was modest, he couldn't have been happier. Esther had graduated law school and secured a job with a prestigious firm, and they had been living together for a year. John had saved up to buy an engagement ring, and Esther's joy when he proposed had filled him with pride. They were set to marry in the spring. John's thoughts turned to a younger, vibrant Esther. Her zest for life made her seem taller than her 5'4" frame, with her long blonde hair and sparkling blue eyes. He recalled how deeply they had loved each other. But the somber mood returned as he remembered the New Year's Eve party at Esther's law firm, shortly after their engagement. He never felt at ease with her colleagues, sensing their contempt for his career choice, which only fueled tensions between him and Esther. By 11 that night, the party had descended into chaos, with drunken antics that made John uncomfortable. He had always been careful not to drink too much, determined not to follow in his father's footsteps, a man who had died in a drunken crash, leaving John's mother to fend for them in poverty. Reflecting on his past, John recalled the mean streets of his youth, where he had roamed with a gang until Tim Murphy came into his life. As a cop, Tim put an end to John's wild ways, showing him that the path he was on led only to misery. John wasn't foolish, and his transition from gang member to honor student happened quickly. Within a few months, he buckled down and started enjoying school for the first time. During this time, he also vowed never to let booze control his life, determined not to become like his father. This resolve was why he felt so uncomfortable at that party, where almost no one, including Esther, was sober. Esther, usually a light drinker, teased him for being a buzzkill and urged him to relax. She was clearly tipsy, and John tried to convince her to leave. She snapped at him, insisting it wasn't even midnight yet and she wanted to stay. John reluctantly waited, avoiding the drunken crowd. As midnight approached, he searched for Esther and finally found her in a passionate embrace with James Moriarty, another young lawyer. Their kiss was far from innocent, and John, pale and trembling, stormed over and pulled her away. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Did you forget you're engaged?" he hissed. Moriarty made the mistake of shoving John, who quickly knocked him to the floor. Esther, furious and red-faced, slapped John hard, drawing the room's attention. In the stunned silence, John calmly removed the engagement ring from her finger, dropped it, and ground it under his heel. Without another word, he walked out, shaking with anger and humiliation. As he reached his car, he forced himself to calm down, though his thoughts were far from rational. All he wanted was to get back to their apartment, pack his things, and leave as quickly as possible. Esther had crossed a line, and John didn't care that she was drunk. His anger left no room for forgiveness. Back at the apartment, John quickly packed his belongings, filling 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. Looking around, he felt a wave of sadness at how little he had to show for their time together. He knew this wasn't just a minor argument. It struck at the core of their relationship, which he now believed was likely over. He doubted he could trust Esther again, either with his fidelity or his dignity. If she wanted to play around, she could do it without him. John soon checked into a Holiday Inn near campus and began planning his next steps. He knew there were rooms available for unmarried faculty at the university, and he intended to lease one. The next day, he realized he had a lot to think about regarding Esther, but he suspected they were done. He also knew he was too angry and embarrassed to think clearly, so distancing himself for a while seemed necessary. In the days that followed, John buried himself in work, ignoring Esther's calls and tearing up her messages. He wasn't ready to face her or risk another confrontation. Despite his anger, he missed her terribly, and wondered if he was overreacting to what might have been just a drunken mistake, though deep down he doubted that explanation. 2 weeks after the party, John reluctantly agreed to have lunch with Art Doyle at the Fairmont Country Club. Doyle had called and insisted on meeting, and John suspected the reason, but kept an open mind. Entering the sunlit dining room, John spotted Doyle seated by the windows and approached the table. Doyle greeted him warmly, extending his hand. "Hello, John. Thanks for coming," Art said with a smile. "Thanks, Mr. Doyle. Nice to see you again," John replied, though his enthusiasm was muted. Doyle smiled gently. "John, please call me Art. I've asked you before. I hope you can consider me a friend." "Of course, Art. I have a lot of respect for you and appreciate the kindness you've shown me," John said as they sat down. They made small talk over lunch until the table was cleared and coffee was served. Doyle looked at John with genuine affection. "John, I'm sure you know why I invited you to lunch. Besides enjoying your company, the main reason is—" "Esther, please just hear me out for a few moments, okay?" John sighed and nodded, knowing this conversation was inevitable, and even welcoming it. He hoped Art could help mend the rift between him and Esther. Art smiled as he began. "John, first, I want to apologize on behalf of the firm. The party got out of hand, and it shouldn't have. Everyone was reprimanded afterward. As for Moriarty, he's been transferred to another city. It turns out his plan to seduce Esther wasn't a secret, and he's gone now. Firing him would have been messier." John raised an eyebrow. "Plan of seduction? So this wasn't just a one-time thing?" he wondered, thinking about what else Esther might have kept from him. Art, sensing John's thoughts, quickly reassured him. "John, I looked into it, and nothing happened beyond what you saw on New Year's Eve. Esther is a mess right now, and I don't want this to ruin a good relationship. It's clear you both still love each other. It's time to talk and sort this out. John knew Art was right. I think I'm ready to have a rational conversation with Esther. I'll call her and set something up. Art grinned. No need, John. Esther's expecting you at the apartment for dinner tonight. Don't worry, I knew you'd come around. John smiled wryly. Fine, Art. I'll be there, but not for dinner. I'll come around 8, and we can talk over coffee. And thanks, Art. I needed the push. That evening, John and Esther talked for nearly 2 hours. Esther, nervous and agitated, struggled to start. John waited patiently, knowing that if they were to move forward, they needed to be honest with each other. He wasn't going to make it easy. Esther had caused this crisis, and it was up to her to begin fixing it. Finally, Esther looked up, tears in her eyes. John, I owe you an apology. I don't know why I kissed him like that. I guess it was the drinks. I'm ashamed and hope you can forgive me. John sighed, looking at her calmly. I understand, but that doesn't lessen the hurt. You sided with someone else instead of me, and that was humiliating. If this is what I have to expect, I'm not sure we should continue. Esther, pale, shook her head. No, John, please, I love you. Don't let one stupid mistake ruin what we have. Esther, John replied softly, we need to be clear about what we expect from each other if we're going to be married. We have to agree on what honor, love, and fidelity mean. In the end, Esther apologized again and promised never to drink to excess. John also apologized for his temper, though he didn't feel his reaction was out of line. They discussed their expectations around fidelity, loyalty, and trust. The next day, John moved back into the apartment, and over time, things returned to normal. Interestingly, John never bought another engagement ring, and Esther never asked for one. They married in the spring, as planned, and had a good marriage. Their love was tested when they discovered John was sterile, but they decided to accept it and focused on their relationship and work. John blinked, realizing he'd been daydreaming. Relieved to see not much time had passed, he noticed his drink was empty and motioned to Chester for another. As he sipped his drink, he thought of Art Doyle with deep affection, feeling a lingering sadness at his recent passing. John had really only formed close friendships with 2 people at the law firm, Art Doyle and Lee Lestrade, a younger partner. Lee joined the firm about 10 years ago and quickly connected with John, starting at one of the company's gatherings. Lee was impressed by John's position as a professor, as Lee himself had always harbored a secret desire to teach. John was glad Lee was still around, but thoughts of his wife Esther darkened his mood. Their 20th anniversary was approaching, but the strain in their relationship made it hard for him to look forward to the milestone. Over nearly 2 decades, their marriage had deteriorated slowly and subtly, and John only recently realized how bad things had gotten. The lack of affection, growing indifference, and even disrespect had become all too apparent, with small spats and a lack of physical closeness now the norm. John was unsure how to address the issues with Esther. He dreaded the thought of another argument, as Esther's sharp tongue had become more frequent. Has it really gotten so bad that I can't even talk to her? He wondered. John was startled by a voice at his ear. Hey, buddy, buy a girl a drink. It was Irene, prompting a small smile from him. Renee! He exclaimed. What are you doing here? You're the last person I expected to see. I stop by every few weeks, John, for old time's sake. Order me a gin and tonic. I'll be right back, she said, heading to the restroom. John smiled affectionately after her. Dr. Irene Adler, an attractive woman in her late 30s, was more than just good-looking. Tall and confident, with dark hair and striking eyes, she was now the assistant chair of the Drama and Performing Arts Department. John and Esther had supported her through 2 divorces and numerous failed relationships, and John considered her his closest friend. When Irene returned, she sat next to John and said, Okay, Johnny, what's the problem? Why do you think there's a problem? And don't give me that nonsense about stopping by here regularly, John replied without much bite. Irene laughed. I saw your car outside as I was driving by and decided to check if it was really you in here. John gazed at her with genuine affection. He trusted her completely, which made it easy for him to open up. He poured out his frustration and confusion about his marriage, and Irene listened, feeling sorrow for her friend's pain. She hadn't realized how much he was hurting and was shocked to discover the rift between him and Esther. John, something must have caused this, Irene interrupted. What you're describing sounds like a buildup of small issues, but there's got to be a deeper reason. Have either of you done something that really upset the other? I can't believe you both just drifted into this state. There has to be a cause. John shook his head. I don't know, Renee. I can't pinpoint anything specific. It feels like we just drifted into this mess and I don't know how to fix it. How about talking to her, John? Just sit down and talk, Irene suggested gently. We've tried, but it always turns into a fight. She accuses me of being paranoid and I lose patience. It's just not working, John replied, his voice fading. Meanwhile, across town, Esther Watson leaned back in her office chair, staring at the tall blonde man across from her. She didn't hide her appraisal of Jim Moriarty, who had been trying to seduce her for months. Though she found him attractive, she knew he wasn't worth risking her marriage over, even if her marriage seemed to be crumbling. Jim, she said, you've been back for over 6 months and you haven't changed. You're still a relentless womanizer. Why not get married again and stop hunting? Come on, Essie, Jim chuckled. I'm just being friendly. You're a beautiful woman, and any man would want to be with you. Your husband is an idiot, more interested in his books than in you, and you know I'm right. You want me? I can see it in your eyes. And it will happen, Esther. It will happen. Esther bit her lip and looked away. Moriarty's comments struck closer to home than she wanted to admit. She was fully aware of the growing distance between her and John. Their relationship had cooled, and John's occasional jabs about lawyers didn't help. She often found herself snapping back, criticizing his profession in return. What used to be harmless teasing had now turned into something more hurtful. Maybe I should have told John about Jim being transferred back, she thought, but I was afraid of his reaction. I hope not telling him wasn't a mistake. Turning her attention back to Moriarty, she said, Jim, let's not go there. My home life is off limits. Leave it alone. Moriarty just smiled. Okay, but remember, I'm always here for you. You've got a friend in me. Yeah, a real friend, Esther replied with a grimace. I know what you're after, Jim. Go chase someone else, but keep it out of the office. Now let's get back to work on the Simmons contract. Moriarty laughed, leaned over and brushed her lips with his before she could react. Then he walked out, humming. Esther sat for a moment, breathing heavily, ashamed to admit that his gesture had affected her. She touched her lips, feeling a thrill she hadn't felt in a long time with John. Is this where all this flirting is leading? She wondered, but she quickly shook off the thought. Her phone rang, and she answered it with impatience. It was Stan Hopkins. Yes? Are you finishing the Simmons contract? He asked. Yes, Stan. We've been at it for months. Why? Is there a problem? Not really, but you'll need to fly up to see him on Monday. He can't make it here, and he wants it finalized then. Damn it, Stan, Esther protested. It's Friday, and we'll have to work all weekend to meet that deadline. I've only had Jim helping me on this. Stan sighed. I know, Essie. I'll get you more help tomorrow, but you'll likely have to work late. Get some rest tonight, and we'll start early tomorrow. Esther ended the call with a half-hearted, okay. She knew this would likely cause another argument with John, who had been complaining about her workload. She feared this might be the final straw, but promised herself that once this project was done, they would focus on their marriage, maybe even take a vacation. She recognized that she had been short and impatient with John lately, and vowed to change once the project was over. Meanwhile, in his office, James Moriarty leaned back, smiling grimly. He knew Esther was vulnerable, and was confident that he could eventually win her over. He hadn't forgotten the New Year's Eve confrontation with John, which had led to his transfer and stalled career. Now he was back, and his plan for revenge was to make Esther his. The weather had turned cooler, and John was eager to get home. He was disappointed to find the house dark as he pulled into the driveway. Crap, he muttered, assuming Esther was working late again. But just then Esther's car pulled up beside his. Surprised, he waited by the door. Hi, sweetie, she said cheerfully. We made it home at the same time. How about we freshen up and go out for a nice dinner? John was wary. Esther's sudden cheerfulness seemed out of place. Something's up, he thought, but decided to play along to see what she had in mind. Despite his doubts, they had a lovely dinner and a warm conversation, which gave John hope. Perhaps they could rekindle what they had lost over the years. For the first time in a long while, John really looked at Esther, appreciating her beauty and sensuality, even after 40 years. He realized he might have been neglecting her, too focused on his career, and resolved to make more of an effort to strengthen their marriage. Esther, too, felt encouraged as she noticed John opening up. She saw the desire in his eyes and felt a surge of affection for him. She vowed to work on their relationship, hoping to get through the Simmons project soon so she could focus on her marriage. As they drove home, Esther cuddled into John's arm, and soon they were home, sharing a glass of wine by the fire with soft music playing in the background. Esther knew she needed to tell John about working tomorrow and the out-of-town trip on Monday. She bit her lip, dreading the conversation and debated whether to wait until the last minute. But she realized that would only make him angrier, so she decided to face it now, even though she knew it wouldn't be easy. "Honey, I have good news," she began. "The Simmons project is almost done, and we can get back to normal soon. I have to work tomorrow to finish the final draft, and then we'll fly out Monday to wrap things up." "I don't need to hear any more," John interrupted sharply. "It's clear your career is more important to you than our marriage. I've heard it all before." He turned to leave, but before heading upstairs, he paused. "Think about what you really want, Essie. I'll do the same." He then went to the guest room, where he undressed and lay in bed, unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling most of the night. The next morning, Esther was up early. She quickly dressed and left without breakfast, still angry about John's harsh words. She knew their marriage was on shaky ground, but pushed those thoughts aside to focus on work. John woke up late, feeling exhausted. He went through his morning routine and noticed that Esther hadn't even made coffee before leaving. He sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, regretting how he had snapped at her. He knew he had been short-tempered for months, but couldn't pinpoint why. Their once loving relationship had turned into constant conflict, and he was determined to fight for their marriage. Remembering their pleasant dinner the night before, John smiled slightly, realizing he still loved Esther. He regretted his outburst and decided to surprise her at work, hoping to take her out for lunch. He knew he needed to be more supportive and planned to show her that he was committed to improving their marriage. As he drove to Esther's office, he felt optimistic, but then his car got a flat tire. Frustrated, he pulled into a nearby diner parking lot and called for roadside assistance, which would take 30 minutes to an hour. Deciding to eat while he waited, he entered the diner and spotted Lee Lestrade, a senior partner at Esther's firm, sitting alone. "John, what a surprise! Join me," Lee said, waving him over. John smiled and sat down. "Nice to see you, Lee. What brings you here on a Saturday?" "Emily's out of town visiting a friend, so I'm on my own. I stopped by the office for a file and decided to grab a bite here. What about you?" "I was on my way to see if Esther wanted lunch, but I got a flat tire. So much for my plans," John chuckled. "Buck up, John. The project Esther and Jim are working on will be done in a few days. We can all celebrate when they're back." "Jim?" John asked, surprised. "I don't recall Esther mentioning him." "Jim Moriarty. He was transferred to the main office about 6 months ago. I'm surprised Esther didn't mention him. They've been working together on this project for a while," Lee explained, not noticing the color drain from John's face. John felt his throat tighten and his stomach churn. A red haze clouded his vision, but he managed to keep control. "I guess I haven't been paying attention, Lee. Sometimes it feels like Esther and I live in two different worlds." He forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, we're all guilty of that sometimes," Lee laughed. It took every bit of John's self-control to stay in that booth, eat his sandwich, and continue talking with Lee. His mind was racing, but he forced himself to stay calm. His heart pounded, and sweat trickled down his sides. When the auto service truck finally arrived, he quickly excused himself. John drove home on autopilot, realizing when he arrived that he couldn't remember the trip. He took a deep breath, stumbled into the house, and sat down, feeling empty and lost. His thoughts were chaotic and he couldn't focus. His mind screamed, "Esther is having an affair!" He fought against the idea, but it kept coming back, leaving him trembling and in pain. He poured himself a drink but then poured it out, refusing to follow in his father's footsteps. John went to the bathroom, considered taking some of Esther's Xanax, but decided against it. He smiled bitterly at the thought. Gradually, the shock wore off and his mind began to clear, though still erratically. "So Jim Moriarty is back," he thought. "And she didn't tell me. No wonder our marriage has been falling apart." He knew he couldn't stay married to a cheater. The word divorce loomed large in his mind, and he realized that counseling was no longer an option. It was too late. As the initial sorrow faded, John felt an icy calm replace it. The boy who had survived the streets took control. He would not be a sufferer. But before taking action, he needed proof. He needed to be sure of Esther's infidelity before he could confront her. A grim smile crossed his lips. "There's a price for cheating," he muttered as he picked up the phone, unaware of the tears streaming down his face. Meanwhile, at the office, Stan Hopkins called out to Esther. "I'm heading out. Are you guys almost done?" "A couple more hours, Stan," she replied. "Jim is finishing up the first draft, and I'm nearly done here." "Don't forget your flight tomorrow evening. Get some rest before your meeting with Simmons," Stan said as he left. Esther sighed, knowing this would likely cause another argument with John. She wondered if they could ever get back to the love they once had. Spending a couple of nights away with Jim, even in separate rooms, could be disastrous if John found out. She worried that not telling him about Jim's return was a serious mistake. I've done nothing wrong and intend to keep it that way, she thought, but anxiety lingered. Later, Irene greeted John at her door. Come in, John. You didn't sound like yourself on the phone. Do you want a drink? Nothing, Irene, John replied. Thanks for letting me come over. I really need to talk. Noticing his drawn features and red eyes, Irene knew something was very wrong. She led him to the living room where he sat down, trying to smile. I'm sorry for bringing my problems to you, Renee. You're always there to share them, he said, attempting a chuckle. Irene waited, inviting his confidence. John began to share his suspicion that Esther was having an affair. It all makes sense now, Renee. Why our marriage has deteriorated. Her coldness, the lack of affection, the disrespect. His voice rose before he regained control. I don't even remember the last time we really made love or even kissed. Can you believe that? Tears welled in his eyes as he spoke. Irene felt deep sympathy for John and Esther. Despite what John had shared, she found it hard to believe Esther would cheat, knowing how much she loved him. John, Irene said gently, I know learning about Moriarty's return has shaken you, but think this through. Maybe Essie didn't mention it because she knew you'd react badly. Couldn't that be the reason? John shook his head. I've considered that, but it doesn't explain everything. His return coincided with our problems, and that's too much of a coincidence. I never doubted her before, even with the late nights and weekends. But now, it's clear, Esther is having an affair with Moriarty. I can't accept that. Our marriage is over. I just need to get the proof before I file for divorce. Irene gasped. Divorce? John, aren't you jumping to conclusions? You only have suspicions. Talk to Essie first. You know she can't lie to you. She's been lying to me for months, Irene. I need proof. Can you help me disguise myself so I can follow them and catch her in the act? Irene laughed despite the tension. John, you don't need makeup. Just change your appearance a bit. Wear a baseball cap, some glasses, and casual clothes. That'll be enough. John nodded. Good idea. I'll fly out after she does and see what I find. At least I'll be doing something. As John left, Irene hugged him and asked to be kept informed. After he left, she stood in the doorway, thinking deeply, her heart heavy for her friend. A stray thought crossed her mind. If John divorces Esther, he'll be available. She quickly dismissed it, scolding herself for even thinking it. But the idea lingered. John returned home late, having walked for miles to clear his mind. Exhausted and emotionally drained, he entered the dark house and collapsed into bed without undressing. Despite his turmoil, he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next day was tense at the Watson household. John and Esther avoided each other, and when the taxi arrived, Esther left without a word. John watched her leave, considering whether his trip the next day was even necessary, but he decided he needed proof, if only for closure. The following morning, a very different-looking John Watson checked into a hotel. Wearing a Phillies cap, horn-rimmed glasses, and casual clothes, he looked nothing like his usual self. Convinced he wouldn't be recognized, he chose a spot in the lobby where he could watch the elevators discreetly. Before heading to his room, John noticed a hotel flower shop. He ordered a dozen roses to be delivered to Esther's room, then positioned himself in the lobby. Soon he saw a bellman carrying the flowers to the elevator. John followed him, noting the room number, 1212, before quickly retreating to avoid being seen. He then returned to his own room on the 9th floor, determined to get the evidence he needed. John took his seat in the lobby around 4 o'clock, pretending to read a newspaper but mostly watching the clock as time crawled by. Finally, at 6:33, he saw Esther enter the lobby with James Moriarty. Despite the years since he'd last seen him, John recognized him instantly. They both looked frustrated, as if their negotiations had gone poorly. Moriarty tried to guide Esther into the dining room, but she pulled away and headed for the elevators, with Moriarty following. After a quick meal in the hotel coffee shop, John returned to his spot in the lobby, pretending to be engrossed in his newspaper. He stayed there until after 11 o'clock, then headed to his room, deep in thought. Maybe I'm being paranoid, he wondered. Their interactions seemed purely professional, no affection, no signs of an affair. But doubts lingered as he prepared for bed. He knew he needed to discuss his concerns with Esther calmly and rationally, without letting it turn into another argument. If they couldn't resolve their issues, they might have to face the end of their marriage. The next morning, John woke late, feeling exhausted despite the sleep. After a quick shower and a light breakfast, he reconsidered his suspicions. Maybe I jumped to conclusions, he thought. He decided to continue his vigil in the lobby for the next 2 nights, though he was starting to doubt anything incriminating would happen. That evening, John was back in his chair in the lobby, anxiously watching the clock. At 7:14, he saw Esther and Moriarty enter the lobby, laughing and holding each other. Moriarty had his arm around Esther's shoulder, and they were clearly enjoying themselves. They headed into the hotel dining room, out of John's sight. Esther was thrilled. They had finally secured Simmons's signature on the contract, and she knew this success could lead to a partnership at the firm. Despite Jim's reputation, she felt grateful for his help. As they celebrated with dinner and wine, Esther's spirits soared, and she agreed to join Jim for a drink in the lounge after changing out of her suit. John watched anxiously as Esther went to the elevators, and Moriarty headed to the lounge. He decided to follow Moriarty and have a drink himself to relieve his tension. Sitting at the far end of the bar, he discreetly watched Moriarty through the bar's mirrored backdrop. He noticed Moriarty sitting alone in a corner booth, nursing a drink. As John sipped his scotch, he began to feel more confident that his fears were unfounded and mentally prepared an apology to Esther. But he kept a close eye on Moriarty, puzzled by his solitary behavior in the nearly empty lounge. John glanced at his watch. It was almost 9:30. He started to leave when his stomach clenched. Esther walked into the lounge, wearing a white silk blouse, a tight black skirt, and a string of pearls John had given her for her 40th birthday. He watched in the mirror as she unsteadily approached Moriarty, who stood to greet her, took her hand, and slid into the booth beside her. From his distance, John couldn't hear their conversation, but the scene spoke volumes. Moriarty ordered drinks, and as they chatted, John saw his wife smiling, laughing, and glowing. Moriarty stroked her hand and touched her arm, and John's anger burned hotter. The sight confirmed what he had dreaded. His marriage was over. But John wasn't going to let this go quietly. He watched grimly as Moriarty whispered in Esther's ear, making her giggle. With the wine from dinner and more drinks, Esther was clearly intoxicated. She didn't resist when Moriarty ordered another round, and she quickly drained her glass. Feeling warm and euphoric, she didn't stop Moriarty when he kissed her. At first, she tried to push him away, but soon she was pulling him closer, their kiss deepening. Suddenly, John's voice cut through the moment. "I'm sure you won't mind if I join you. I should applaud, but I won't," he said, sliding into the booth opposite them. Esther, confused, gasped when she realized her husband was sitting across from her. Moriarty fumbled to fix his clothes and tried to leave, but John stopped him with a venomous whisper. "You move, and I'll rip your face off." Moriarty, remembering their previous encounter, decided not to challenge John and remained seated, looking frightened. Esther, now sober, was chilled by John's icy demeanor and the contempt in his eyes. "Tell me about my paranoia, Essie," John said coldly. "Tell me how unreasonable I am, how I should be more understanding." Turning to Moriarty, who was squirming, John continued, "I should thank you for pulling your hand out when I arrived. I'm not sure my wife would have thought to do that." Esther, now in tears, felt nauseous and lightheaded. The man before her was unrecognizable, not because of his clothes, but because of the hatred in his eyes. John's voice dripped with sarcasm as he said, "I should apologize for interrupting. I should have let you continue. You were so engrossed. How long have you been screwing him, honey? How did it feel making me a cuckoo?" John's rage was barely contained. Moriarty tried to speak, but John cut him off. "Get out, you creep. But remember, one day I'll find you and I'll eliminate you. It may not be tomorrow or next week, but one day." Moriarty didn't wait for a second warning and nearly ran out of the lounge. John chuckled grimly as he watched him leave, then turned back to Esther, who stared at him in horror. She had never heard such venom in his voice. John looked at her disheveled clothes, bile rising in his throat, and wondered what had gone so wrong between them. Was it him? Was he that bad of a husband? Or was it Esther who was so dissatisfied with him and his profession? John suddenly realized he didn't care about the reasons anymore. His thoughts were interrupted by Esther's tearful voice. "John, please. I let things go too far. I was just so happy about the Simmons contract. Please forgive me. I'm so sorry," she sobbed. John stared at her. "Shut up, Esther. I don't want to hear any more lies or excuses," he muttered wearily. He then revealed her underwear, a twisted piece of red nylon and lace. "I gave these to you for your birthday. You said scarlet was your favorite color. You saved them for a special occasion, but not for me. You wore them today for him." His voice turned bitter. "Stay here with Moriarty. Don't come home until I'm gone. I'm filing for divorce." Esther gasped, turning pale. We'll split everything, but you can have the house. I'll take my clothes and research materials. Don't fight it, Essie, or I'll testify about tonight and ruin your career. And his. John pocketed her undergarments, stood up, and walked away, leaving Esther sobbing. 3 months later, John had moved out and filed for divorce, but Esther was fighting it. Despite his threat to expose her affair, John found he couldn't bring himself to do it. He realized he didn't want to publicly humiliate her or himself. His attorney, Sherwood Holmes, informed him that Esther wanted a private conversation before she would agree to the divorce. Holmes advised John to talk to her to avoid dragging the process out and costing him more money. John, sitting in Holmes's office, gazed out the window, then snapped, "Screw her. Let her fight the divorce. I don't care." Holmes, leaning back in his chair, tried to reason with him. "John, we've been friends a long time. This will cost you a fortune if you don't settle. Just talk to her so you can move on." But John refused. "No, Woody, I know what she'll say. She'll either admit the affair and beg for forgiveness or lie about it. I don't want to hear it. Hold off on the divorce. It's not important anymore. I'm not planning to remarry." Holmes sighed. "Okay, John, but when you're ready, let's have dinner. It's been too long." John apologized for not reaching out sooner, knowing Holmes was still grieving the loss of his wife. He promised to call soon, then left the office, his shoulders slumped in the cold gray afternoon. John returned to his new townhouse, a rental he'd spent weeks fixing up to start his new life. As he walked through the rooms, he simmered at Esther's refusal to let go. Despite the spacious modern surroundings, what truly pleased him was the small add-on, a hot tub where he had spent many hours relaxing, trying to ease his mental tension. Meanwhile, Irene was going through her own troubles. "Damn it, Irene, it's not the end of the world," Tony yelled. "It's just not working." "Screw you, Tony," Irene shot back. "You're just scared of your mother. Get out." She turned away, hiding her tears. Tony hesitated, looking regretful, then quietly left. Irene collapsed on the sofa, a wry smile on her lips. She didn't truly love Tony, but it frustrated her that she couldn't keep a man. "What's wrong with me?" she wondered. "Why can't I find someone to share my life with?" Irene took a deep breath and headed to the bathroom. After using the toilet, she stepped into the shower, letting the hot water wash away some of her tension. She quickly soaped up, rinsed off, and dried herself with a towel. As she reached for her robe, she caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror and critically examined her reflection, a tall, mature woman with flawless olive skin and short, dark hair framing her face. She grimaced and muttered, "Crap." Irritated, she threw on her robe and flopped onto the bed. She tried to distract herself by reading a novel, but quickly gave up, tossing the book aside. "Damn it, I need a drink," she said aloud. She went to the kitchen, poured herself a bourbon on the rocks, and sank into an easy chair in the living room, wondering where her life was headed. "Stop feeling sorry for yourself," she muttered. "I need company. I need to get out." An idea sparked, and she picked up the phone and dialed. "John, it's Irene. Are you busy? I'd like to come over." After hearing his response, she said, "Great, I'll see you in an hour or sooner." As darkness fell, Irene pulled into John's driveway. Before she could ring the bell, John opened the door and pulled her into the warm foyer. "Perfect timing," John laughed. "The food just arrived. Give me your coat and let's eat." "Wow, John, you sure know how to treat a girl. I didn't realize how hungry I was until now," Irene replied. They chatted while enjoying Chinese takeout, then moved to the living room with the last of a bottle of wine. After some banter, John suggested, "Enough of this light stuff. Let's get serious." He fetched a bottle of good scotch, poured them both a drink, and settled across from her. "Okay, what's bothering you? Tell Uncle John." Irene laughed and sipped her drink. "This is good stuff, John, but yeah, it's Tony. He broke up with me today. What's wrong with me? Why can't I keep a man?" John leaned forward. "Renee, the problem is the guys you choose. You're a beautiful, intelligent woman, but you keep picking idiots who break your heart." Irene was taken aback, initially angry, but soon realized he was right. "Son of a witch, you're right. Why haven't I seen that before?" "You're not a loser, Renee," John reassured her. "Maybe you should talk to someone who can help. Hell, maybe I should too." They exchanged a look, then burst into laughter. "What a pair we are," Irene said, taking another sip. "At least you had almost 20 great years with one woman." Realizing her mistake as she saw John's eyes tear up, she quickly apologized. "Nah, it's okay," John replied. "Those were wonderful years, which makes this all the harder. When trust is gone, everything is suspect. He sighed. Let's just get drunk together. They continued drinking, knowing it wouldn't help but not caring. After a while, Irene slurred, Johnny, you never let me use that spa out there. Let's do it now, John agreed, stumbling toward her. With their arms linked, they made their way to the alcove. Uh-oh, no swimsuit, Irene said, laughing. Screw it, let's skinny dip, John replied, and they both undressed. They soon found themselves in the warm, swirling water, John admiring Irene's beauty, and Irene, uncharacteristically unashamed, returning the compliment. You're not so bad either, Johnny, she said with a smile as they settled into the spa. They sat side by side, enjoying the warm jets of water. Despite the whiskey fogging his mind, John knew he had to be careful not to jeopardize their friendship. Irene, however, was less hesitant. Should I make a move? Will he get angry? Oh, hell, why not? She thought, and moved closer to John. John tensed at her approach, but quickly pulled back, splashing water on his face. Damn, I'm sorry, Renee, I just can't. I'm sorry, he muttered, trembling slightly. Irene helped the now despondent John out of the spa and into a robe, then guided him to bed like a child. He fell asleep almost immediately. Knowing she couldn't drive home, Irene settled into the second bedroom but struggled to sleep. She realized that John, despite being separated from Esther, was still unavailable. In her heart, she knew she didn't truly love him as more than a friend. Her tears were for John's pain, knowing how deeply he loved Esther and how her betrayal would haunt him. Irene knew John was suffering, but she didn't know how to help. Meanwhile, Esther was also struggling. She had lost weight, looked pale, and was drained. Irene decided to visit Esther, sensing her need for support. Renee, I messed up badly, but John is wrong. I never had an affair with Jim or anyone else. I can't get him to talk to me. He thinks I've been unfaithful for months, but I haven't. What he saw that night was the first time anything like that happened, Esther explained tearfully. I understand, Esther, but John is adamant. He won't see or talk to you. I've never seen him like this, Irene replied. I've hurt him so badly, Esther whispered. I think he's too hurt even to face me, and I don't blame him. Trying to regain her composure, Esther asked, Renee, can you stay with me for a while? I need your support. Of course I'll stay, Irene agreed, though she wished she could do more. Esther looked at her watch and made a call. Woody, it's Esther. I've decided to give John what he wants. No conditions. Yes, I'll see you tomorrow. Turning to Irene, she said, I'm going to give John the divorce. He deserves closure, and I can't keep fighting this. Irene paled. Esther, are you sure? I know you both love each other. Maybe I can talk to John again. No, it's not fair to keep him in limbo. He's made it clear our marriage is over, and I have no one to blame but myself, Esther said, her voice wavering. But please stay with me. I really need you right now. Of course, I'll stay as long as you need, Irene reassured her, taking her cold hands. Later, John was stunned when his attorney, Woody, informed him that Esther wasn't going to fight the divorce. She's not fighting it? She never gives in easily. What's going on? Let her come and see if she goes through with it. I won't hold my breath, though, John replied. After agreeing to meet Woody for dinner, John wandered through his home, feeling conflicted. He should have felt satisfied, but instead he felt uneasy. What the hell is wrong with me? He muttered. I'm getting what I wanted, right? So why this feeling? As he reached for a beer in the kitchen, the phone rang. Hello? Oh, hi, Renee. What's up? Forget it. Oh, sure. I'm meeting Woody Holmes tonight, but you're welcome to join us. I'll pick you up around 6:30. And Renee, no more nagging, okay? See you this evening. Bye. Later that evening, John and Irene entered the restaurant where Woody Holmes was waiting. Distracted by thoughts of Esther and the divorce, John introduced his friends rather mechanically. It wasn't until he noticed the silence that he saw Irene blushing and Woody holding her hand as if he never wanted to let go. Hey, you two, John teased. You're like teenagers on a blind date. I take it you like each other. Woody blushed and released Irene's hand. Sorry about that, he stammered. Irene, still blushing, laughed nervously and quickly took a seat. Geez, John, you're embarrassing us. Throughout dinner, they avoided discussing John's pending divorce, agreeing to wait until Esther actually signed the papers before speculating. The evening's focus shifted to Woody and Irene, leaving John as the third wheel. He didn't mind and watched with a bemused smile as his friends grew more smitten with each other. John realized this meeting might be good for both of them. Woody might find solace after his wife's passing, and Irene might have finally found a decent man. After dinner, John excused himself to the restroom. When he returned, Woody stammered, John, I hope this is okay. Oh, for pity's sake, Irene interrupted. John, Woody would like to drive me home. I'm sure you won't mind. John teased. Well, I don't know. I did pick you up. John, Irene warned. John laughed. Of course not. I don't mind at all. The next day, Esther arrived at Woody's office. It's nice to see you, even under these circumstances, Woody said, shaking her hand. Please, have a seat. Thanks, Woody. Let's get this over with. I understand why John refuses to see or speak with me, Esther said wearily. Woody noticed how pale and tired she looked. I'm sorry, Esther. I tried to change his mind, but you know how stubborn he is. I'm glad you're not contesting the divorce, though. Esther nodded and signed the papers without reading them, surprising Woody. Aren't you going to read it? What for? I trust you, and I know John won't screw me over. He has more integrity than I do, she replied softly. Esther, this must be tearing you apart. Now that you've signed, I'll try to talk to John again. He might be more open now, Woody suggested. Esther shrugged. Whatever happens, I'll understand. I ruined my marriage, and I don't blame anyone but myself. I hope John and I could at least be friends, but... Tears welled up, and she quickly excused herself. After she left, Woody called Irene. Renee, Esther just left. She signed the divorce papers without even reading them. Can you talk to John and let him know? Maybe we can make him feel a bit guilty about refusing to talk to her. Yes, we're meddling, but for a good cause. Let's meet tonight at 7. John stood outside the home he once shared with Esther, feeling anxious and sweating despite the chilly weather. He hesitated, wondering if meeting her was the right decision. Irene's last conversation with him still bothered him. She insisted that Esther wasn't making excuses, but that the situation was a mix of booze, success, and flattery from Jim. Nonsense, Irene, John had snapped. You're saying it was just because she was near him? That's not what I meant, Irene shot back. Eventually, she convinced John to meet Esther. As John debated leaving, Esther opened the door, silhouetted by the light behind her. John, please come in, she pleaded. John straightened, forcing a smile. Okay, thank you, Esther, he muttered, stepping inside the house that once was his home. Everything seemed unchanged, except for a light layer of dust, which surprised him, knowing how meticulous Esther usually was. He didn't comment. John, thank you for agreeing to see me, Esther said softly. I appreciate it, and I promise I won't keep you long. Okay, Esther. Woody and Irene convinced me to come. I don't see how this will help, but since you're not contesting the divorce, I agreed to meet, John replied flatly, with no warmth in his voice. Esther swallowed, knowing this confrontation would be difficult, but she was determined to face it. She needed to tell John the truth and admit her foolishness, hoping for his forgiveness, which she felt would cleanse her conscience. John, please, just listen. I need you to hear me, Esther pleaded, her eyes full of desperation. John paused, his gaze intense, before nodding and sitting stiffly. Okay, Esther, I'm listening, he said. Esther took a deep breath. John, please believe me when I say I never slept with Jim or anyone else. I never intended to. I know what you saw that night seems to contradict this, but it's the truth. John interrupted. Esther, the truth is rarely pure and never simple. Blushing, Esther pressed on. I can't fully explain my behavior that night. I've tormented myself, asking why I let it happen. The only reasons I can think of are the relief of finishing the contract and the booze I drank. But those are no excuses. I was someone I'm ashamed of, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. John sat expressionless, his emotions churning. Strangely, he believed her claim of not sleeping with Jim, but that only added to his inner turmoil. I was also angry with you, John, Esther admitted. I felt you weren't being supportive, but I know that's no excuse. I've replayed everything in my mind, and I realize how shallow and stupid I was. But believe me, John, you can't hate me more than I hate myself, she whispered, wiping her tears. Is there any way we can save our marriage? Counseling, anything? John sighed, feeling a deep sense of loss. Esther, if I hadn't interrupted that night, can you honestly say you wouldn't have ended up in bed with him? Wouldn't have been unfaithful? Esther gasped, realizing she couldn't truthfully deny it. She knew she would have crossed that line, and the weight of that truth made her feel sick. You see, Esther, that's the issue, John said, his voice rising before he forced himself to calm down. You cheated on our marriage when you let him kiss you. When you returned those kisses, and when you let him undress and touch you, things meant only for me, your husband. Do you understand? Esther now fully grasped what John was saying. She hadn't considered the full implications of that night until now, and she knew he was right. She would have ended up in Jim's bed, and that realization brought a wave of hopelessness and tears. John looked at her with pity. "I feel sorry for you, Essie, and for myself. Maybe I share some blame. I could have been more supportive. But that doesn't excuse your behavior." He continued softly. "Now, I have to ask myself a question. Can I live with suspicion or regret? Can I continue our marriage with the constant fear you'll betray me again? Or is it better to live with the regret of our failed marriage? I'm sorry, Essie. I can't live with suspicion. Regret is easier." John stood, watching his wife sobbing on the sofa, and then slowly walked out into the night.
My wife wanted an open marriage. I refused, and she ended up cheating on me in our bedroom. Damn it, I should have seen it coming. With some foresight, it would have been obvious, like 2 trains on a collision course. But I wasn't paying attention. I could blame it on one train hiding in a tunnel, but all the warning signs were there. I was just too smitten with the girl to notice when the other train came roaring out. I was completely blindsided. Enough with the metaphors, let's get to the point. Throughout school, they were always there, but you didn't really notice them as 2 separate people. They were Mercedes Koff and Portia Rowan, known as the twins. They dressed, spoke, and styled their hair the same. They might as well have been joined at the hip, though they weren't related. They weren't standoffish. In their teens, they dated boys, but only double dated. If a guy liked one, he had to find a date for the other. I liked both, but never bothered with the double date game. It was too much hassle, and the girls were picky. The issue never arose for me because, at 16, my dad got me an apprenticeship with my Uncle Harry in London. "Get an apprenticeship and you'll have a job for life," my dad said. So, I moved in with Uncle Harry and Auntie Mavis in the suburbs. Most of our work was there too, and I had one day, an evening a week, at technical college. Uncle Harry worked me hard, even on weekends, to make up for college days. My trips home dwindled from monthly to barely 3 times a year. By the end of my apprenticeship, home felt like a stranger's place. I'd saved enough money to rent a flat back in my hometown. Work was easy to find with my papers, and the pay was good. I started on a site with 50 new houses and then moved to a smaller job on a barn conversion. One day, while discussing plans over tea, I mentioned a large blank wall on the building. The boss handed me the artist's drawing and said, "Show me." I sketched the changes I thought would be improvements. Later, I was called to the site office where the boss, the owner, and the architect were. After some heated exchanges, my changes were added to the plan. On the day we handed over the house, the architect told me, "You should be an architect or designer. You have an eye for design." A few weeks later, I signed up for a part-time college course in architecture. I continued working on building sites to support my studies. One day, in the college library, I noticed a familiar-looking young woman. She smiled at me briefly before returning to her book. I stared at her, trying to place her face. She caught me staring, got up, and walked over to me. She rotated my book and said, "You'll find it easier to read if it's the right way up, Roger." I looked up, surprised. "Mercedes, you've changed a lot. Is that a compliment?" "Of course. But where's Tish?" I asked. "She's in the States doing an internship." We were supposed to be there together, but my placement fell through. I decided to brush up on my Spanish here. We talked until the librarian shushed us, then moved to the refectory. By the time she had to go to class, we had made plans for the evening. I drove her home in my old van since I was doing some side work and needed it for my tools. When I pulled up outside her upscale house, I wondered what her parents thought. We sat in the van chatting about school until I asked her out for the next evening. Her reply hinted at something I missed at the time. "That would be nice, Roger. I haven't been out since Tish left." I arrived at her house at 7:30 that Friday. Her father opened the door, giving me a once-over like I was unwelcome. He looked at my van with obvious disdain. Inside, I met her mother and younger sister Estelle, who I remembered from school. They were pleasant, but her father clearly didn't like me. Typical protective father behavior, if you ask me. When Dee entered the room, my jaw dropped. I'd known her since she was a kid, and while I'd noticed her pleasant face and nice figure the day before, I was unprepared for the stunning woman who walked in that evening. It was like poetry in motion. I was speechless. That evening, we went to a local pub with live music and a dance floor. Although we danced a few times, we spent most of the night talking. I can't remember what we discussed, but we always seemed to agree on almost everything, except for Portia. I had no interest in her, but pretended to for Dee's sake, as she clearly missed her lifelong companion. Our first date led to a second and third, and by the end of the month, Mercedes and I were inseparable. When not at college or working, we were together. Dee would wait by my van after evening classes and meet me for lunch. I was smitten with her, and she seemed to feel the same. Dee joined me in bed after 3 months together. She couldn't use the pill, so we used other protection, which sometimes spoiled the mood. Despite this, we found other ways to satisfy each other. Dee corresponded with Tish regularly, but I didn't realize how it affected our relationship. Dee's physical preferences changed over time. Initially, she wanted nothing to do with mouth loving, but by February she was eager to try it and soon became enthusiastic. We started talking seriously about getting engaged and married. I bought her a ring in late July, and we planned to marry after her finals the following summer. Dee's mother was thrilled, but her father thought she could do better than a builder. Estelle, Dee's sister, bluntly suggested I should marry her instead. In early August, Portia returned from the States with her American boyfriend, George Greenlake. I didn't like him. He was brash and a know-it-all. One evening, I came home to find Dee in my flat looking distressed. There were 3 coffee cups on the table. When I told her I'd change quickly so we could go out, she blurted out, "You can't go in there yet. Tish and George are using our bed." Like hell they are. An apt statement from me. Actually, I believe in the saying that an Englishman's home is his castle, and the most personal item in my home is my bed. This likely stems from returning to my parents' house from Uncle Harry's to find a lodger sleeping in my bed. I think they heard my outburst because Portia and George entered the kitchen a couple of minutes later still getting dressed. Despite their apologies, they didn't change the sheets or make the bed. Dee assured me they hadn't asked her permission. From their behavior, I believed her. They acted as if they were the most important people in the world. While George was in the country, the 4 of us hung out. Portia borrowed her father's car most of the time, as my van only had 3 seats in the front. I refused to ride in her father's car because George drove. Once they were away from her house, Dee always rode with me. One evening, I watched with sick amusement as George drove out of a pub car park straight into a bus. I honked my horn, which helped the bus driver stop before too much damage was done. George had driven on the wrong side of the road, a common mistake for foreigners. George wasn't insured to drive and didn't have an international license, though the police accepted his American one after Portia's father arrived. I took Dee home. George flew back home the next weekend. September arrived quickly. My old van became crucial for moving Tish and Dee's gear to their flat at university. Suddenly, Portia was happy to travel in my van. Once her stuff was loaded, after her father discovered his new Saab had been wrecked, he didn't volunteer to drive her. Soon the girls were gone. I missed Dee, though not Tish. Despite dating Dee for a while, I'd only been invited to her house for a meal once, mainly to ask her father for her hand in marriage. The week after the girls left, Dee's mother invited me to Sunday lunch. I got along well with Dee's mother and sister, who still followed me like a puppy. Dee's father even started calling me son and invited me to golf, a sport I'd have to take up after marrying Dee to keep the in-laws happy. I suspected an ulterior motive in these invitations. When Dee came home monthly to visit, we spent a lot of time at her parents' house. I was now a regular and welcome visitor. Most weekends, Tish joined us, talking about George and her plans to marry him after graduation. Tish often came home with Dee, spending most of her time wherever Dee was, including my flat. By Christmas, wedding plans were in full swing. Dee's mother and Estelle were organizing everything, with Dee and me agreeing to their plans. Dee's father was footing the bill. I'd ask, "Are you all right with this, Frank?" He'd nod and say, "Wait till it's your turn, son, only have boys." He wasn't a bad guy. Estelle saw our marriage as a rehearsal for her own big one. Frank would raise his eyebrows whenever she said that. Everything was going great until just after Easter, when Portia got dumped by George. He left her for another girl, confirming he was an insensitive idiot. Portia wasn't my favorite person, but I saw that letter, and it was brutal. A few weeks later, Dee suggested postponing our wedding because Tish was upset. The girls graduated and moved back home, and both quickly found jobs at local banks. I continued juggling college and work, often working alone or with a few employees. Initially, I saw Dee almost daily, but she started going out with Tish more often. Eventually, 3 nights a week, Dee stopped meeting me after my night classes. We postponed our wedding to after Christmas, then to Easter. I was patient, but it seemed we had to wait until Tish found a new boyfriend before Dee would marry me. In early December, I went to pick Dee up around 7:30, but she and Tish weren't home and hadn't called. I found her car at a pub on the outskirts of town. Inside, Dee and Tish were with some guy, engrossed in his nonsense. I sat across the room and watched them eat and chat, noting Dee was drinking non-alcoholic drinks. When they left around 9, Dee spotted my van. She came back inside looking for me. "Roger, how long have you been here?" she asked. "Since about 8. My fiancée stood me up, so I had a quiet drink, I said. Why didn't you join us? She asked. You didn't want me along, did you? If you had, you would have called. Was it a fancy menage a trois or something? I replied. How can you say that? Rodney invited Tish and she didn't want to go alone, Dee said defensively. Why no call to me or your mother? I demanded. I forgot, she said. Well, I forgot to tell you I was here. Now drive your friends home and drop the idiot off first. I don't trust him, I instructed. Who are you calling an idiot? He demanded. You slimy git, I retorted. He bragged all night about being tough, but when we took it outside, he ran away after trying to slam the door in my face. Did you have to do that? Tish liked him, Dee demanded. I didn't do anything. He talked himself into a corner in a fight, then ran. I just went out for a drink after getting stood up. Good night, I said. I returned to the bar to finish my drink. Dee came back inside for a minute to whisper with Tish, then they left. The next evening, I didn't pick Dee up as usual. She let herself into my flat around. Why didn't you pick me up? We were supposed to see that film, she asked. Oh, I forgot, I replied. Don't talk rubbish. This is about last night, isn't it? She accused. It's about us and your friendship with Tish, I clarified. What does Tish have to do with it? She asked, confused. Everything. If she weren't around, we'd be married by now, but you've postponed our wedding because Tish hasn't found someone. I'm not waiting anymore. The wedding is in February, or it's off, and you'll see Tish only 2 nights a week. The evenings I'm at college, I stated firmly. You can't make demands like that, she protested. I can. I'm supposed to be the guy you want to marry, but you worry more about Tish. Think about what you really want, and tell me tomorrow night. If you're not here by 9, it's over. You can keep or sell the ring, I concluded. Dee tried to change my mind, but I was done waiting. When I got home from work, Dee's house was calling nonstop. I ignored it. At 9, I left and went to a friend's flat to watch mine. Dee arrived with Tish and the guy from the pub. She searched my flat, found it empty, and then they all left. Dee returned alone later. My friend suggested I talk to Dee, but I felt she had made her choice. Around midnight, Dee came back with Tish. Neither of them left by morning, and I couldn't leave my friend's flat without being seen. I wanted them to wonder where I was. They were likely waiting me out, knowing I'd need my van. I called a guy who worked for me and had him drive my van to the site. The girls chased the van, thinking I was driving. Then I got into my car, which Dee didn't know about. I drove to a house I'd bought for our married life, still under construction. Every time the wedding date was pushed back, the work on the house was delayed. I stayed at the house overnight. The next day was a college day, and I couldn't miss it. Despite the progress on my building projects and the good income, I still aimed to become an architect. Having the car that Dee didn't know about saved me that day. I saw both girls at college but avoided them. If Dee had been alone, I might have spoken to her, but Portia's presence deterred me. That evening, I called the flat. Brian had told me that Portia had left Dee alone. Roger, where are you? Dee asked. That's none of your business, I replied. Roger, I'm sorry, but I couldn't let Portia go to that concert alone. But she wasn't alone. She had that guy with her. Or was he with you? He's Tish's boyfriend, you know that. I'm your girl. You were not anymore. Did you tell your mother to confirm the February wedding date? No, I didn't. You were acting so strange. You're the one acting strange. Last night was your chance to choose between Portia and me. You chose her. It's over. The engagement and wedding are off. Goodbye, and please leave the flat tidy. I don't live there anymore, as you've probably noticed. Where are you living, Roger? In the house I bought for our wedding. But you chose not to live here with me. Goodbye, Dee. I hung up. The next evening, Dee's parents visited me. They knew about the house since I discussed almost everything with them. Although my relationship with Dee's father was always tenuous, they kept my secrets about the car and house. They understood my position and hoped Dee's affection for me would separate her from Portia. That didn't happen. It was a sad parting, and they wished me well. They never told Dee about the house or their visit. They believed Dee would always be under Portia's influence. Dee tried to talk to me over the next few months, but was always with Portia. I refused to speak to her in Portia's presence. Dee still told people we were engaged, which caused problems. I was trying to move on and started dating other girls, though not very successfully. One girl who wanted a serious relationship overheard Dee claiming we were still engaged. This led to a confrontation. After that, I never heard any more claims from Dee about our engagement. Time passed, and at the end of that college year, I abandoned my dream of becoming an architect. Officially, it was because my building business had taken off, which was true. I had built a reputation for quality work. However, the real reason was that Dee had enrolled in a design course. I needed seeing her name on the list made me decide not to register. Instead, I focused on my growing business and quickly became one of the most respected small builders in town. I didn't see much of Dee or Portia. Estelle visited occasionally, hinting she could replace Dee in my life. While I liked her, I knew it wouldn't work because I'd always be running into Dee. Nearly 2 years after breaking up with Dee, I reconnected with Shirley, an old school friend. Shirley was fun to be around, and we quickly fell in love. 8 months later, we married in a small ceremony. Soon after, Shirley was diagnosed with cancer. It went into remission after chemotherapy, but we always feared its return. Over the next 5 years, I focused on Shirley and my business. Despite her illness, Shirley gave me 2 wonderful daughters. In our 5th year, Shirley's cancer returned aggressively, and chemo was ineffective. She chose to stop treatment and spent 3 more years with us before passing away. Our daughters, 6 and 7, supported me through the funeral and wake. Shirley had prepared them well. My company had done renovation work for Shirley's church, including rebuilding a wall and reserving a grave plot near the church's main door for her. Although not religious, I wanted Shirley's grave to be in a lively spot. One day, I'll join her there. At the house after the funeral, I was surprised to see Dee's father, Frank and Estelle. They offered their condolences and explained that Dee's mother was ill in the hospital, which is why she couldn't attend. A few days later, I visited her in the same ward Shirley had been in. Although she was recovering, I never learned what her illness was. Catherine, as she insisted I call her, asked me to bring my daughters to see her when she got home. Apparently, she had spoken with Shirley often during her last days. Catherine told me that Dee was no longer living at home, so there was no risk of running into her. 3 weeks later, I took my daughters to meet Catherine and Frank, who became like grandparents to them. Estelle frequently visited, and my neighbors thought we were involved until her boyfriend Russell started coming over too. He was eager to marry Estelle, but she kept him waiting, similar to how Dee had treated me. Estelle and Russell helped a lot with the girls, making me reconsider hiring a nanny. One day, Russell expressed frustration about Estelle not committing to marriage. I advised Estelle to seize the opportunity with Russell, unlike what had happened with Dee and me. Her cryptic response was, "You really don't know, do you?" Eventually, Estelle agreed to marry Russell and asked me to be the best man. I agreed, knowing Dee would be at the wedding but not wanting to stress Estelle. On a sunny June day, I stood with Russell at the altar while my daughters were bridesmaids. During the service, there was a commotion as Portia and George arrived late, causing Estelle to mutter "crap," which the congregation heard due to her microphone. The service continued smoothly. Afterward, as we exited the church, Catherine turned to me and said, "We never thought they'd have the cheek to turn up. We thought we were safe sending them an invite since they live in America." As we approached the back of the church, I saw Dee sitting with a couple of other women. She looked unhappy, and her presence surprised Catherine, causing her to falter briefly before continuing with a smile and nod to Dee. And I avoided eye contact. It was clear something had happened within the family that I wasn't aware of. Outside, during the obligatory photo session, I noticed Dee wasn't in the lineup. Estelle tried to motion her over, but Dee didn't move. Estelle then gestured to me. Understanding her unspoken request, I slipped away, circled behind Dee, and took her by the arm, guiding her into the lineup. "Smile, this is your sister's wedding," I whispered firmly. "What do I have to smile about?" Dee replied. "A lot more than my wife had." "That was her grave you almost stood on back there," I reminded her. Dee apologized, and I reminded her that she had reasons to be grateful. One of the ushers handed me a small bouquet, which I gave to Dee before returning to my place. Dee managed to smile, though she still looked unhappy. After the photos, I began herding people into the limousines for the reception. My daughters demanded hugs and praise for their behavior. I noticed their bouquets were missing, likely handed off to Dee. She had disappeared back into the crowd, which was a relief. Portia came up to say hello, but I wasn't interested in her or George's story. Before leaving, I visited Shirley's grave. There were now 3 small bouquets alongside the large one I had placed earlier. I spoke to Shirley as I always did, even though I don't believe in the afterlife. It's funny how we do that, isn't it? Talking to loved ones as if they can hear us. At the hotel reception, it was clear Dee's presence was unexpected. After Catherine left the welcoming line, she scrambled to rearrange the seating at the top table to include Dee. I helped but didn't ask about the family situation. After the meal and speeches, I thought I could relax. Being a best man involves more than you think, and I wasn't prepared for Russell's speech. He announced Estelle had a crush on me for years, and thanked me for convincing her to marry him instead. In my speech, I mentioned knowing Russell for only a few months, but assured everyone, based on my daughter's approval, that he was a good match for Estelle. Once the speeches were over, the dancing began. Estelle and Russell started, followed by the parents, then me with the bridesmaids. Moran and I danced with my daughters, making it a fun foursome. Estelle and Russell joined us, creating a unique waltz. Dee sat with her friends away from the family table. Later, Estelle asked me to dance, and I took the chance to inquire about Dee. Not now, Roger. Meet me in reception in 10 minutes, and I'll explain. Someone might overhear us here. After our dance, I saw Estelle speak with Russell, who nodded. She then headed to the ladies' room, which had another door to the foyer, so I met her there. We sat in a corner, and she began to explain. When you and Dee broke up, Mom and Dad were furious with her. They were always worried about her relationship with Portia, not because they thought it was physical, but because of Portia's influence. They were thrilled when you came along, but Frank wasn't too keen on me. Dad actually thought you were amazing, but played the proud father role. He didn't want to scare you off by being too enthusiastic. He's the one who always praised your building skills. When Dee started postponing the wedding, we all warned her she'd lose you. When you called it off, it was because of Dee and Portia. Portia kept telling Dee she could do better and to make you wait. Dee couldn't see how Portia was using her. Why did you invite Portia to your wedding? We had to. Her father is a business partner of Dad's. We didn't think they'd actually show up. What happened with Dee and the family? A year after you broke up with Dee, George asked Portia to marry him, and they moved to the States. Dee was dumped and realized how Portia used her. She lost the only man she loved for a friend who left her. Dee had a breakdown after that. She believed you'd come back to her, but your marriage to Shirley shattered that. She blamed the family and had to go to a clinic afterward. She moved to London, feeling too guilty to face us and not wanting to run into you and Shirley. We cut you off to avoid slipping up and saying something too. We rarely saw her. When Mom met Shirley in the hospital, they talked a lot. Shirley asked Mom to look after you and the girls, Estelle explained. Why was your mom so surprised to see Dee today? I asked. Dee came down for my bachelorette party and looked better than she had in years. We were getting along until someone mentioned you were the best man. Dee said she couldn't attend if you were here, so we assumed she wasn't coming. Mom rearranged the seating to cover for her absence, Estelle replied. But you only had to say, and I would have stepped aside, I said. We know, Roger. You're a wonderful person, but we couldn't disappoint the girls. They were so excited to be my bridesmaids. Weren't they amazing? Estelle asked. Yes, I was very proud of them. Their mother would have. Been proud too, I said. I'm sure she would have. I wish I could have known her. From what Mom says, she was a brave woman and lucky to have you, Estelle said warmly. Anyway, the girls must have convinced Dee. They worked on her all yesterday. Now I need a favor. You can say no, Estelle said hesitantly. On your wedding day, I couldn't refuse you anything. What's the favor? I asked. I want you to dance with Dee. Russell has danced with her, but she won't join the family table, partly because you and the girls are there. She won't refuse you. Thanks for getting her in the photos, by the way, Estelle requested. I'll do anything for you, but what if Dee won't dance or makes a scene? I asked, concerned. Russell and I have a plan. He'll ask Dee to dance when we go back in, and you'll dance with me. We'll accidentally bump into each other and switch partners. Dee won't refuse once you're dancing with her. After the song, bring her to the family table. I'm sure she won't leave once she's there, Estelle explained. Are you sure this is a good idea, Estelle? I asked, uncertain. Honestly, I don't know, but Dee needs to see that we don't hold a grudge, and hopefully you don't either. Things were going well at my hen party until you were mentioned. I'm hoping your presence will help, Estelle admitted. All right, let's do it. Lead the way, I agreed. Oh, Roger, don't be like that, Estelle said with a laugh. I'm just teasing you, I responded with a smile. By the way, Mom's coming to see you tomorrow morning. She has something for you. You'll be in, right? Estelle asked. Yes, the girls are so excited they'll probably be up all night, I assured her. Estelle took my arm and we headed back into the hall. The band started playing a waltz and we joined the dancers. I saw Russell guiding Dee toward us. The slight bump and quick partner switch caught Dee off guard. She stiffened when she realized she was dancing with me. Come on, Dee, relax, I urged gently. She did relax, almost too much, leaning heavily against me. As the waltz ended, I half carried her to a chair by her mother. Frank sat on her other side while I joined my daughters. The band was loud, so I couldn't hear their conversation, but it was good to see Dee talking to her parents. Around 11, I decided to take my girls home. It was past their bedtime, and they'd had a long day. Estelle and her mother kissed us goodnight, and my girls, though they kissed Dee too, didn't seem to recognize her. The next morning, we woke up late. The girls were up before me, eager to swim. They wouldn't go into the pool without an adult, a rule Shirley had instilled. Just before noon, Catherine and Frank arrived. We greeted them, and it was clear my girls had bonded with them. My parents favored my brother's kids, and Shirley's parents lived far away, so the girls hadn't bonded with them as much. After everyone settled with cold drinks, Catherine asked to speak privately. Frank stayed with the girls. I led Catherine to the lounge where we could still see the kids and Frank playing. Catherine handed me an envelope from her bag. Shirley asked me to give this to you 6 months after anyway. She wrote some herself and dictated the rest to me when she got too weak. I took the envelope and began to open it. I'll go outside while you read it. If you need to talk, I'm here. I unfolded the letter, written partly in Shirley's deteriorating handwriting and partly in Catherine's neat script. Hey, lover boy, the letter began. How are you and our girls getting along without me? By the time you read this, I'll have been gone for 6 months. I asked Kathy to hold on to it for that long before giving it to you. This is very hard for me to write. I'm not sure what I want to say or how to say it. Please forgive me if it doesn't come out right. Roger, I feel guilty, not just for leaving you, but also for marrying you in the first place and bringing all my problems into your life. We'd only been dating a couple of weeks when the doctor gave me the news. It took me some time to decide whether to tell you or not. I was scared you'd stay with me out of a twisted sense of duty. You know you're that kind of man, but I must tell you, I loved you, and I know you loved me for who I was. When you encouraged me to have the girls, even though you knew you'd likely raise them alone, I knew it wasn't pity but real love. I'm sorry I can never repay you for all the love you've shown me. Roger, I have loved you more than any man I've ever known. I know you don't believe in an afterlife, but I hope one day you'll be proven wrong and we'll meet again there. That's the worst part over with. Now, I need you to think about the rest of your life and our girls' lives. I have a big favor to ask. Please find another mother for our girls. They will need a mother as they grow older, and you will need a companion. Having met Catherine, I think I know the best candidate, and I think you know too. Catherine has told me a lot about Mercedes and you and what happened between you two. From what Sia's told me, I'm sure Mercedes did, and still does, love you. She was under that horrible girl's influence. I know it's not nice to say, but that worked out in my favor, even though I know it upset you at the time. They say the Lord moves in mysterious ways. Please consider finding Mercedes again. Show her the compassion and love you've shown me in the last few years. Hopefully she will love you and my girls as much as I do. Roger, I know she loves you. At this point, the letter changed to Catherine's handwriting. Catherine and Frank have become good friends of mine since I've been in the hospital this time. I've also gotten to know Estelle, who visited me the other day. Estelle loves you too. God, you are a lucky man. All these people whose lives you've touched love you. Kathy assures me she will keep a friendly eye on you and our girls. You know they don't have any grandchildren yet, and they assure me they will treat our girls as if they are their own. Please let them do that no matter what happens. Kathy has been a good friend to me during these long, lonely nights. Anyway, if all goes well and you do as I hope, Catherine and Frank will be the girls' real grandparents. I can't think of anything else to say. Thank you, Roger, for loving me, and remember, if I can, I will always watch over you and the girls from wherever I am. Goodbye, my love, till we meet again. Shirley. The signature, with 8 crosses under it, one for each year we were together, was in Shirley's shaky hand. I sat and cried for I don't know how long before Catherine came back into the lounge with a cup of tea for me. I can only assume she'd been watching me read the letter through the lounge window. I suddenly realized I couldn't hear the girls playing in the garden anymore. I must have looked around in panic. It's all right, Frank took them out for ice cream. It's warm enough for swimsuits today, Catherine said reassuringly. Thanks, Catherine. You know what's in this letter, don't you? I asked. Yes, but you don't have to follow Shirley's suggestions about Mercedes. The letter is private and I'll keep it confidential, Catherine replied. Thank you, Kathy. What do you think of Shirley's ideas? I inquired. I won't advise you, Roger. I'm Mercedes' mother, so I'm biased. It's your decision, but you should get to know Mercedes again before deciding, Catherine responded cautiously. Dee might not want to marry me anymore. It's been years, I said, expressing my concern. I'm trying not to influence you, but Dee said yesterday how lovely your girls are and wish they were hers, implying she regrets not marrying you, Catherine shared. I understand. I still have strong feelings for Dee. Leaving her was the hardest thing I've ever done. I had to force myself to be angry with her. I'm not sure I can let go of those feelings, I confessed. Are you going to try? Catherine asked softly. Of course, it was Shirley's last request, but I need to know Dee socially again and see how the girls get along with her before considering a relationship, I explained. You're right, the children must come first, Catherine agreed. Yes, we need to see if they connect with Dee naturally, I said, emphasizing the importance of the children's feelings. Exactly, we can't let them feel someone is replacing Shirley. It would be a disaster. I don't want to hurt Dee again if the children aren't happy. I couldn't do that to her, Catherine added thoughtfully. Catherine kissed my forehead. Shirley knew you well. She always said you were the most thoughtful person she knew, she said with affection. I blushed. How are we going to get the girls together with Dee? I asked, trying to change the subject. They mentioned missing your old pool parties. Why not have one in a couple of weeks? Dee is coming down for a family get-together after Estelle and Russell return from their honeymoon. It's meant to rebuild family connections. If you host a pool party, Frank and I can help with the cooking. Dee would come without knowing and might stay even if she's embarrassed. You'd be busy with guests, and Estelle and Russell could entertain the kids. We'll see how Dee interacts with them, Catherine suggested. Sounds good. The girls have mentioned pool parties, but without Shirley, it feels different. She was the heart of every party, I admitted. Shirley would love the idea. Remember, she wanted you to find another mother for the girls, Catherine reminded me. 2 weeks later, I woke up to hear my daughters talking to someone downstairs. Dragging myself out of bed, I found Estelle and Russell unloading a car full of goodies. It was then I realized how much effort Shirley had put into these pool dues, as she called them. They had brought many things I had overlooked, things I'd never had to think about before. Estelle later told me that Catherine had been given a list of forgotten items by my girls when she called the previous evening. I wondered why the girls hadn't pointed out my oversights. When I asked, they said, I would be too busy. The lawns need to be mown before any guests arrive. Do as you're told, Roger, and don't ask questions. I thought I told you Shirley had trained them, and me, well. Just after lunch, some guys who worked for me started to arrive with their wives and girlfriends, as did some neighbors with their children. Catherine and Frank arrived around 1:30, with a very quiet Dee in tow. She seemed embarrassed to see me at first, but soon was playing with Estelle and the kids in the pool. I think she was wearing one of Estelle's swimsuits. It looked familiar. I spent most of the day mingling, often with Russell as company. I think I heard almost every detail of their honeymoon, except for the private stuff. I speculate they didn't get out of bed for the first 2 days because Russell didn't mention those. It's funny how sometimes what people don't say is the most telling. Around in the evening, I thought it was time for the kids to go to bed. Russell nudged me as Dee went up with Estelle to settle them down. Half an hour later, when the two sisters came back down, I went up to kiss my girls goodnight. Is that really her, Daddy? My oldest asked as soon as I got to their bedroom. Who are you talking about? I asked. Is she going to be our new mother? The younger one explained. Hold on, where did you two get the idea that there is going to be a new mommy? I asked, puzzled. Don't be silly, Daddy. Mommy told us a long time ago that you'd find another mother for us, my oldest replied confidently. Oh, she did she? And what else did your mommy tell you that she didn't tell me? I inquired. She said that Estelle's sister would probably be our new mother. We were to help you catch her, the younger one added. Catch her? What did she mean by that? I asked, intrigued. Mommy said Dee got away the first time, and if you got friendly with her again, we should help you catch her, my oldest explained. Oh God, Shirley, you've really set me up, haven't you? I muttered to myself. Sorry, Daddy, I couldn't hear what you said, my youngest said. Oh, nothing, girls. I was just offering a prayer to your mother. Now give me a kiss goodnight and we'll talk about things tomorrow, I said, trying to stay composed. Is Dee coming over again? We like her, my youngest asked. I don't know, baby, she might, I replied. Well, if she doesn't come over, can we visit her? My oldest asked hopefully. There comes a time in everyone's life when you have to admit you're on a losing wicket and throw in the towel. I figured this was my time. Okay, girls, if Dee doesn't come to see us tomorrow, we will go see her. Now, will you both please go to sleep? I said, giving in. Good night, Daddy, they said in unison. I'm damn sure I heard them giggle as I left the room. When I got to the stairs, I sat down on the top step. I could hear the party going on outside and someone doing something in the kitchen. For a little while, I needed some time alone to think about what my girls had said. Bugger, don't talk rubbish, you bleeding idiot. You've got to think about everything. Since Shirley passed on, you've been drifting along without much thought about anything. A little voice in my head seemed to say. It was obvious my girls liked Dee from the moment they saw her. I remembered how they looked at her at Estelle's wedding. The question was, did I still like Dee? What a stupid question to ask myself. Like her, I loved her. Well, I did once, didn't I? Although I pushed Dee away because I didn't want to share her affections with Tish. Well, Tish isn't in the equation anymore, but my girls are. Yeah, I think I could see myself sharing my girls with Dee. Hey, how did that question get turned around? And if I think back, what was it Shirley had said to me more than once? Half of you is enough for me, Roger. What did Shirley mean by that? Had I never given Shirley all my love? Did she know there was a place in my heart for Dee? Damn, that woman could read me like a book. Bugger, why does life have to be so complicated? Wouldn't it be nice to be one of those people who see everything in black and white? I have so many different thoughts at once. Right, Roger, let's think this out logically. Do you love Dee? Yes, I'm sure I do. Do the girls love Dee? They've just met her, but they certainly seem to like her. There isn't much to dislike about Dee, but they can't love her yet. They have only just met her, but they do seem prepared to accept Dee as a surrogate mother without question. Now, does Dee like the girls? From what I saw by the pool, she's really taken with them. No, I don't think that was an act. Dee's mind doesn't work that way. No, Dee was having a great time with my girls. I could see them bonding quickly. Now, the big one, does Dee still love you? Well, there's only one way. To find out, you silly sod, go and ask her. Back outside, most of the remaining guests were sitting in a big circle on the patio by the pool. Russell was making sure everyone's drinks were topped off while Frank was still scrubbing down the barbecue. I think Frank was a more conscientious cook than I ever was. As I approached the circle of chairs, Catherine got up and came towards me. Mercedes, Estelle, and Estelle are in the kitchen doing some of the washing up. This might be a good time for you to talk to Mercedes alone while she's busy at the sink. Don't worry, Estelle will make herself scarce when you get in there, Catherine suggested. Between you and my two girls, you're planning to get Dee and me married off pretty quickly, aren't you? I asked with a hint of amusement. Roger, I can assure you none of us have said anything to Mercedes about you two getting back together, but I'm afraid the girls were asking her some embarrassing questions earlier. We weren't expecting that, Catherine admitted. So, I gather. I think Shirley had been planning this for a long time. I just wish she'd let me in on it. Tell me, Catherine, how long did you know Shirley? You didn't just meet her on her last day in the hospital, did you? I probed. Well, no, Roger. We met at the cancer support group. Didn't you know? Catherine revealed. No, Shirley never talked about what went on there. So, she was planning this reconciliation between Dee and me for some time then? I asked, feeling a mix of surprise and realization. To be honest, Roger, I don't really know when she found out who I was. Shirley asked me about you and Dee. I told her the truth as I saw it, but she did say to me more than once that if you two got back together, she wouldn't have to worry about you and the girls, Catherine explained. Damn it, I know for sure now that Shirley knew me far better than I know myself, I said with a sigh. Woman's intuition, Roger. You chose a wonderful wife in Shirley. Now why don't you go have a quiet word with Mercedes? Catherine encouraged. I went into the kitchen where Dee was washing and Estelle was drying. I took the drying cloth from Estelle before Dee realized I had entered the room. For a few minutes, Dee kept washing and placing things on the draining board, and I dried them. Then she suddenly stopped. She must have seen my arm taking the plate she just put down. She turned and looked at me. Long time since we've done this together, Dee, I said. Dee didn't reply. She just looked at me. I placed the plate in the rack and held out my hand for the next one. Dee passed me the dirty plate she was about to wash. Shouldn't it go in the water first? I asked with a smile. Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking, she said as she took the plate back and started to wash it. I'd say you were thinking, but not about the washing up, Dee. Tell me, what were you thinking? I asked gently. Do you really want to know? She asked, her voice trembling. I wouldn't ask if I didn't want to know, I replied sincerely. I was thinking what a bloody idiot I am, she confessed. And why is that? I asked, my heart pounding. Well, I had the chance to spend the rest of my life with you, and I threw it away. How could I have been that stupid? Dee said, her eyes filling with tears. Maybe you weren't stupid, Dee. My wife Shirley was a believer, not that I've ever been, but she always did say the Lord moves in mysterious ways. Perhaps if he does exist, and I'm not saying he does, he had a job for me to do before we got married. Now I think that job is over, and there's a job for you to do now, I said, trying to find the right words. And what's that? Dee asked, looking confused. Well, there are two little girls upstairs who are missing a mother. They seem to think you were the chosen one, I said softly. Dee looked at me with a confused look. Let's put it this way. They had some nice new dresses they wore as Estelle's bridesmaids, and now they want to wear more as your bridesmaids, I explained. Roger, are you asking me to marry you? Dee asked, stunned. Well, no, I don't have to ask you that question. I asked you that question years ago. I'm still waiting for you to name the bloody day, I said, trying to lighten the mood. Wrong thing to say. 2 plates got broken. The one Dee was washing when she dropped it as she almost fainted, and the one I dropped as I went to catch Dee before she fell. The sound of the plates breaking brought Catherine and Estelle into the kitchen from the hall, followed by 2 little girls who should have been in bed. I had a nasty suspicion they were all eavesdropping out there, and Frank came running in the back door from the garden. The scene they walked into was me holding Dee in my arms. Catherine and Estelle started crying. My girls, who had big grins on their faces, couldn't understand why they were doing that, nor could they understand why their daddy and Dee had started crying either. I thought you two were in bed asleep, I managed to say to them once I got my emotions under control. Come on, I'll take you back up, I offered. No, Roger, I'll do it. I've got to get used to looking after them, Dee said as she extracted herself from my embrace. Come on, girls, we've got lots to talk about, she added, taking their hands. Catherine worked miracles, and a month later it was our wedding day. Russell and I got to the church early, and I asked him to wait while I had a word with Shirley. I walked over to her grave alone. Well, girl, you set me up good and proper, didn't you? Now, this was your idea, so I don't want you getting upset with me over it. I think you're right, though. Dee will make a great mother for the girls. Look, Shirley, you do realize what you've done here? Dee is going to want some children of her own sometime, so don't you dare hold it against me when we get all cozy with each other. Well, I'd better go now, but I'll be back with the girls in a couple of weeks. Dee and I are going away tomorrow for a week or so, but I'll tell you all about it when we get back. Bye for now, babe. 10 minutes later, I was standing before that same altar again, but this time I had switched places with Russell. I have to admit, I was surprised that my entire family had shown up. I think that was Catherine's doing. She can be very persuasive. What puzzled me was that 8 of my workers were all dressed in identical new suits, which was unusual unless they got a bulk deal, which I doubted. They were sitting at the ends of the pews by the aisles, not with their families. I suspected something was up. As the service ended, all 8 got up and left the church before Dee and I started our procession out. As we walked through the main door, we were confronted by the guys standing in 2 neat lines, long-handled shovels at the shoulder. Someone called out a command, and the shovels first went to the present and then into a line of arches for Dee and me to walk under. You buggers, I said to them as we stopped under the arches while the photographer took pictures. We ain't finished yet, Raj, one of them whispered back. I wondered what they had planned next. Then we had the usual photo call. During this, Dee received a large bouquet of flowers. When the photographer finished, and we started towards the waiting limousine, Dee suddenly stopped. Will you wait here for me a moment, Roger? There's something I need to do now. Please don't move. I watched as Dee walked over to Shirley's grave and placed the bouquet beside the one I had left before the wedding. She stood there alone for a few moments, speaking softly, though no one could hear her. Then she signaled to my girls, who joined her and placed their small bouquets on their mother's grave. Now I realized where the 3 bouquets came from at Estelle's wedding. It was obvious if I had only thought about it. Once Dee rejoined me, we continued towards the limousine only to see it drive away. As we approached, it was replaced by my old Bedford van. The last time I saw it was 3 weeks earlier when the guys decided our yard needed a cleanup. I thought it had gone to the scrapyard. Now it stood there looking better than ever, with bright new paint, ribbons hanging from the ladders on the roof rack, and a liveried chauffeur at the wheel. The boys opened the sliding side door, revealing the back had been fitted with a sofa for Dee and me to sit on. It's a convertible, boss. If you get impatient, just pull the lever under the arm, and you've got a bed, one of the boys whispered with a smile. With smiles all around, Dee and I climbed inside. The sliding door was locked open for the short drive to the hotel where the reception was held. That night, Dee and I spent our first night together as husband and wife. I woke up at some ungodly hour to the sound of Dee sobbing. What's wrong, babe? I asked. What a stupid, inane way to ask her. Nothing. I'm just so happy, but I'm annoyed with myself for how I behave towards you. I thought you would wait forever. Well, we're together forever now, so stop dwelling on the past, I said as I took her in my arms and kissed her. Our past was never mentioned again. The girls started calling Dee mother very quickly. They only ever called Dee mother and never mommy, which they reserved for Shirley. Whose idea that was, I don't know. But Dee often asked the girls how mummy would do something and then followed suit. Several years passed before that train whistle sounded again. We were all watching a video one evening when the telephone rang. Our eldest answered it. While I paused the video, "Who's calling?" I heard my daughter ask. "Mother, it's for you. Someone called poor Tisha." Dee took the phone from my daughter, pressed the speakerphone button, and set the handset down. "Hi, Tish. How are you keeping?" "Oh, Dee, it's wonderful to hear your voice. I'm in a real state. I caught George running around on me, so I'm getting divorced. I really need to meet up with you for a chat. We could get together like old times." "Well, yes, I suppose I could meet you for lunch." "Hold on a moment while I check my diary," Dee said as she picked up her handbag. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dee was going to reconnect with Portia. Dee saw the astonished look on my face and smiled. "What's the date today?" Dee asked, not directed at anyone in particular. "The 3rd of August, came Portia's voice from the phone. "How about the August 6th, 2026, Dee said. 2026, Dee? That's 20 years away, you must be joking, Portia replied. "No, Tish, I'm quite serious. All our 3 children should be out of the house by then, so I should have time for lunch with you." 3 children. I thought Roger only had 2. No, actually, Roger and I have 2 and a bit at the moment. There's a chance it could be 2 and 2 bits. Twins run in my family. Goodbye, Portia. Call me in about 20 years. With any luck, we'll have changed our phone number by then. Dee switched off the phone and sat back with a silly grin on her face. Our 2 girls were quicker to understand and started to laugh. Suddenly, I realized what Dee had said to Portia. Twins? I asked. Well, that's what the doctor thinks, but it's a little early to be sure yet, Dee replied. I was hoping to know for sure before I told you and the girls.
I'm a disabled veteran who, unfortunately, lost my job due to the ongoing pandemic. As a result, I'm at home while my wife continues to work. Our son was born shortly before COVID appeared, and he's now a year old. During this time, I've taken on all household responsibilities, from cooking and cleaning to doing the laundry, to ensure everything runs smoothly. I've also been looking after our 9-year-old and 1-year-old kids, helping with their schoolwork and preparing their meals. My ex-wife and I had a tough upbringing, and we both wanted to give our children the kind of upbringing we missed out on. However, she had our last child to try to save our relationship, which was failing. I supported her decision to work more for extra income, but when the pandemic started, our financial situation worsened, and we had to move in with my mother to save money and reduce her workload. I didn't know she'd been seeing someone else since March. I began to suspect in April, and by my birthday in May, I was sure. Her infidelity and lack of affection left me feeling completely alone. Now, my kids and I live with my mom, while she moved in with her boyfriend. It's been almost a month, but the pain of separation still lingers. My daughter has distanced herself from her mother, and my son shows no interest in her, not even asking for basic things like milk. They seem to have moved on from the initial pain, but I still feel terribly lonely. It's like walking beside someone, sharing a story, and then turning around to find that they've disappeared. 14 years feel like they've gone to waste. To cope with this, I've focused on training, and am proud to say that I've finally dropped below 200 pounds after many years. Now, my main motivation is to keep moving forward for the sake of my children and deal with my emotions. I've also started writing poetry, but since she kept lying about her ongoing connection with the other person, I realized it's pointless to communicate with her. Despite the lingering pain, I hold hope for the future. Finding a lawyer is tough because my mom has trouble finding someone she can trust. I want to be careful and have full trust in the lawyer's professional abilities. Though my brother and mother have been a tremendous source of support through all my difficulties, I'm seeking advice here. She left me for a colleague, which initially led me to plan a separation agreement and consult a lawyer, but the high cost prevented that. I've taken a positive step by attending consultations for myself and my daughter, which is a good development. To prepare for school, I've decided that she'll study reading and math workbooks to get back on track with her education. Meanwhile, I'm in thought and seeking advice. My soon-to-be ex-wife is currently in a psychiatric hospital, and while I hope for her recovery, I'm not sure it's wise for her to become more involved in our children's lives. She chose her partner over our 9-year-old and 1-year-old kids, and I'm concerned she might do the same with them at 10 and 2. While I initially wanted to support her, I'm now focused on my own recovery and not maintaining contact with her, as her progress could hinder mine. I genuinely want her to get better, but I don't want to be present in this situation. Does that make me a bad person? I refrain from asking about her hospitalization reasons, but based on my past experience as a firefighter, I think it may be related to doing bad things. I plan to start the trial as soon as possible and stay by her side, sincerely hoping for her recovery, but I can't hide my anger at her for putting me in such a difficult situation. My children don't know the current situation, which deeply concerns me. To keep ourselves occupied, I organized a drawing evening, trying to understand why life has to be so tough. I see that our little son has suffered greatly from this ordeal. He's developed separation anxiety, which increases every time his mother visits him. Unfortunately, she doesn't seem to notice these problems appearing suddenly after several weeks of absence. This situation is unbearable, and dealing with it alone is incredibly difficult. I miss the person she used to be, and it's a tough journey. Our daughter still unconditionally follows her mother's example. She admires her and wants to be like her. I understand that she feels some resentment due to the current circumstances, but I can't fully grasp her emotions. Over the past 2 months, my ex has visited them 4 or 5 times, even allowing them to spend the night at her new place. However, her messages to our daughter are one-sided, with all the conversations initiated by her. Upon reflection, I realized that I had overlooked these signs for a long time. It seemed like our daughter constantly showed disinterest, barely noticing my presence and responding with only one word. I chose to ignore this, but now I see that all the signs were there. Her mobile phone was always face down, and she often found excuses to go back to work, showing a lack of interest in communicating with me. During that time, I played the role of a babysitter, while she enjoyed parties and a full-fledged relationship with her boyfriend. I finally realized this on my birthday, when she did absolutely nothing, even though she had always shown care and effort. This led me to start an investigation, and I discovered she had been dating her colleague since March. In February, we went on a family trip, and at that time, I thought everything was fine. But I've learned to trust my instincts and not be blinded by her actions again. Despite this, I genuinely hope she finds well-being and happiness for the sake of our children. I remain committed to prioritizing our children. In an effort to maintain a healthy co-parenting dynamic, I've decided to avoid contact with her and focus solely on our children's issues. Unfortunately, she keeps trying to reach out to me as if nothing has changed. Despite my initial attempts to respond politely, I've become increasingly upset and responded with anger and hostility as I'm not ready to talk to her yet. Before cutting off contact, I frequently sent her photos of our children, hoping she'd understand she was leaving. It appears her relationship with her partner didn't work out as expected, and she's now in the hospital. She wants to play a more active role in our children's lives, but it's challenging since she lives an hour away and has a busy schedule. I used to support her after work, but now I refuse to be her backup. I know my worth, and I deserve more than being someone's second or third choice. Once she emotionally recovers, we can work on a healthy co-parenting dynamic. I won't save her now as I couldn't do it before. After speaking with her hospital doctor, I learned she'll be discharged soon. While I feel guilty, I believe she should find her own way since she chose to leave me and the children. The thought that she might do bad things herself causes me great anxiety, making it hard to breathe. Additionally, my ex's partner in love affairs tried to contact me on Facebook, but I blocked him and took a screenshot as evidence, breaking my rule of no contact just to inform my ex. She showed no interest or concern and didn't feel it was her responsibility to deal with him. Technically, it isn't. I hoped she would resolve this issue on my behalf, but instead, she explained at length how she was trying to improve the situation for the sake of our children. This incident taught me a valuable lesson. Never break the no-contact rule, even if something hurts you. I've done well with this, maintaining a month of no contact. I'm still upset that a certain person is trying to follow me, but honestly, I don't care about him at all. My anger is primarily related to the consequences of my relationship with my ex, and such situations only hinder my progress. I'm consumed by deep anger and resentment towards the woman I once thought I'd love forever. Thoughts of her often visit my mind, and every time they appear, I utter curses after them. I'm not that kind of person, never harboring ill will towards others, but my ex-wife's presence makes me furious. The hardest part is maintaining a facade of consent in front of my children. Though I refrain from mentioning her, there are times when my daughter remembers her name, and in those moments, it takes all my strength not to speak ill of my ex and remain indifferent. I don't want the person she left me for to hinder my progress. While he took my wife, I've firmly decided not to let him obstruct my path. I'm determined to protect my emotional well-being from their interference. Despite them not being very pleasant people, I want them to stay away from me and my children. On weekends, my daughter and I enjoy movie nights, and during the week, my son and I go for daily walks while his sister is at school. Being a dad brings me great joy, but it leaves me with very little time for myself. My days are filled with training, and the only adult I truly trust is my Veterans Affairs consultant. Right now, My main focus is on treating post-traumatic stress disorder. My constant thoughts about my ex make it hard for me to concentrate on my responsibilities, especially in raising our children. It's painful to realize how taken advantage of I feel. In the past, I devoted so much to support her career climb. I was by her side during her long work hours and even gave her foot massages when she returned. All I'm left with now is a sense of worthlessness, as if my efforts meant nothing. I wonder if others are going through a similar situation, and, if so, how they're managing. Engaging in physical activities like training and kickboxing has provided some relief, though it seems like only a small part of what I need to heal. In an attempt to move forward, I registered on the Match website, even though I recognize that I'm not emotionally ready for a new relationship. Recently, I made the decision to step out of my comfort zone and be more honest with myself. Recovering from infidelity is undoubtedly a tough journey. A few months ago, I came across a book called Stop Being Mr. Nice Guy, which delves into the white knight theory and ways to overcome it. Reflecting on my past actions, I can acknowledge that I fell into some of these traps, but I don't believe that my actions were solely driven by the desire to earn knight points. After my service in the Army, I continued to maintain the uniform and ensure everything was in order. It had become second nature to me, perhaps in the hope of easing my partner's work fatigue even just a little. Ultimately, I've always been someone who likes to solve problems and find solutions, with or without her. I feel that being considerate and helping others ultimately didn't benefit me. I've always been the kind of person who leaves a situation cleaner than I found it. While serving in the fire department, I lived with other guys and learned how to clean up after myself. However, I began to realize that maybe I was too kind. But is it a bad thing to appreciate kindness? Unfortunately, it seems challenging to come across truly kind individuals, but it appears to be common to encounter pain. It's disheartening to see my ex pursuing a new lifestyle, especially when, after just 6 months, she's already seeking full custody of our children and spousal support. I'm eagerly anticipating the upcoming trial. Currently, my primary thoughts revolve around post-traumatic stress disorder, the well-being of our children, and my hidden anger towards my future ex-spouse. While I mainly focus on the first two, I wish for time to pass more quickly. I understand the importance of being present in the moment, but it's tough for me to shake off this feeling of emptiness within. Recently, my wife told me that our daughter had expressed an interest in self-mutilation due to her refusal to communicate with her. Throughout November, they didn't communicate. A few days later, a deputy sheriff called me, requesting that I surrender a firearm registered to my wife, as she's not allowed to have it. This situation makes me question whether my attempts at reconciliation are naive, even though I removed the block after she revealed her thoughts about doing bad things. Believing that such statements should be taken seriously, we resumed correspondence. However, I suspect she's still spending time with her boyfriend and using this situation as a way to spend time with our kids. Given these circumstances, I understand the need to approach her words with caution and a great deal of skepticism. Despite this, I'm uncertain about the sincerity of her intentions. If she were to end her current relationship, regardless of whether she's with him or not, I would consider reconciliation. However, I'd require her to continue with the divorce process according to plan and provide written confirmation of my full custody of our children. I've already filed my response to her divorce application, and we're currently awaiting a court date. I also suspect that she's aware of her unfavorable position in court, which may worsen her situation. She mentioned that her family no longer communicates with her, a fact I can confirm since I'm still in touch with many of them. Furthermore, she expressed a desire to find a job in our city, which I hope she'll consider. Tonight we took our kids to the movies. The therapist who's helping our daughter expressed concerns about her engaging in, so I took swift action. Even our 1-year-old child is overjoyed that his mother has returned to him. Personally, I feel emotionally distant. On the flip side, I'm using the dating app Bumble, and while I've had some decent connections, nothing serious has developed. There are a few people I'd like to form deeper connections with, but the reality is that most people aren't eager to get involved with someone responsible for raising 2 children. What's more, I worry about the possibility that after months of building a meaningful connection with someone, my daughter might reject them. To be honest, if my daughter had rejected me, I would have ended this relationship. After our breakup, my life started improving. I've been attending therapy, monitoring my diet, and even practicing kung fu. Since she left, I've experienced significant personal growth, and I'm uncertain whether it would be unwise to consider reuniting as a family. It's important to note that she's currently attending therapy and taking medication, which is a significant factor to consider. She's also expressed interest in both of us attending couples therapy. The pace at which events are unfolding feels overwhelming. If it turns out that she's pregnant with someone else's child and is trying to manipulate me into raising that child, I won't participate in such a situation. I have many thoughts and doubts swirling in my head, and I'd greatly appreciate any guidance. I'm not certain about what I want at the moment. While I do feel a desire to reconcile with her, I'm also aware of her capabilities. My daughter's well-being significantly influences my decision-making process, so I need to proceed with caution. I can't make decisions based solely on emotions, but I must admit that my children's happiness is of utmost importance to me. If I had the opportunity, I believe it would be valuable to invest another 10 years in a relationship with my ex and put in a genuine effort. It's worth mentioning that although my ex is currently employed and I am not, my status as a disabled veteran with a low rating during our marriage has prompted me to seek help from Veterans Services. They recommended an increase in my rating, which could potentially lead to me earning more than my ex. In any case, such a rating increase would be highly beneficial for me. I tend to agree that becoming the primary caregiver for our children is the more likely outcome. However, given her recent attempts at doing bad things and the fact that I had to hand over her firearm, I believe this strengthens my case for gaining more custody. It's not just about the children's well-being, it's also about the foundation I've worked hard to build. I'm on a positive life path, with or without her, and I'm determined not to look back with regrets, feeling that I didn't do everything possible to keep my family together. She claims to attend therapy 3 times a week and take medication. In our 16 years of marriage, she never engaged in self-mutilation, but after our separation, she made 3 attempts. It's challenging for me to discern what to believe. She's aware of my past as a firefighter and the traumatic situations I often encountered. It's possible that she's using this knowledge as a form of manipulation. However, based on my personal experience, even if people don't resort to ending their lives in this way, they often inflict severe physical bad influence on themselves. Memories of the blood I witnessed still haunt me, and the taste of copper remains vivid in my memory. It was incomprehensible to see a physically strong and muscular man brought to tears, standing in his undergarments, holding onto his wife. I was left in utter perplexity. I recently had a conversation with my daughter, and she expressed a desire for our family to become whole again, with all 4 of us together. I told her that I wouldn't be able to forgive her mother if she continued the relationship and advised her not to set her hopes too high. I've realized that if I continue with the current approach, completely cutting off all contact, it will also affect the children. It seems to me that my negativity towards their mother is evident and has an impact on them. She may not understand the immense effort required for reconciliation, but that's my concern. I can't allow my ex to dictate the pace of my progress, just as I can't allow my kids to determine the outcome. Restoring our family at this point necessitates me setting an example and taking the initiative. It's crucial to demonstrate to my children that I won't succumb to emotional manipulation. Reuniting with this woman won't fix our family. It will only worsen the situation. This thought has been haunting me. How will my daughter perceive the relationship? If she witnesses it, the toxicity might persist, and if her mother leaves again, the consequences will be even more devastating. Additionally, my daughter might inadvertently attract the wrong people into her life because she has already encountered such behavior. On the other hand, this situation can serve as an opportunity to teach them that love is not perfect. It's not a typical romantic comedy scenario, but if my ex is genuinely seeking guidance from therapists, I believe we have a chance. Even if the likelihood of success is just 1%, I'm willing to attempt to restore our family. Of course, I understand perfectly well that all of this could backfire. I realize that if I don't make changes and if she doesn't improve, our relationship is undoubtedly destined to fail. However, if she continues with therapy, takes her medications, and finds self-awareness, we have a chance to overcome everything. In the future, when our children have grown up, and if we decide to go our separate ways, that's something I can accept. If we assume that we're raising them properly, following the values we've set, then I'll evaluate her actions to assess her character. She claims she's no longer involved with the AP, affair partner. She states that she's been undergoing therapy and taking medication since July, explaining that her recent lifestyle hasn't been as pleasant as I assumed, and that she's been feeling sad for several months. I tend to attribute these events to her mental health disorder, so I believe it's necessary to consult with her therapist before considering the possibility of a real reconciliation. If she's diagnosed with bipolar disorder, or if it's confirmed that it was a major depressive episode and she expresses remorse, we might have an opportunity. But if she desires an open relationship, it's better for both of us to move on. I'm truly grateful for all of you for sharing your thoughts and perspectives, as it seems you all understand the pain caused by trauma. I've come to realize that she was using manipulation to push me towards reconciliation. She informed me that after our breakup, she made 3 attempts at doing bad things, and currently, she attends therapy 3 times a week. In our individual talks and group discussions, she mentioned that she's taking medication. Even though I haven't personally spoken to her therapist, I suspect she might be struggling with high levels of depression and codependency. She expressed her intention to quit her current job and shared her desire to find a place nearby to spend more time with the children. She also mentioned how she feels a lack of family in her life. After our recent trip to the movies, she visited us several times, which brought great joy to our daughter. This made me decide to break the period of no contact. The school psychotherapist is worried that my daughter might engage in doing bad things, which is a result of issues stemming from her mother's rejection. On a positive note, my son seems to be doing well, but I can't help but miss her and wish to reunite our family. I remember how much she loved me, especially since we've been together since we were 18. Recently, she asked me out on a date, and although I agreed because she's making an effort, deep down, I understand that I'm not emotionally ready for this. It's important to emphasize that I'm committed to not having a relationship with her. If it were to come to that, I would insist on a paternity test. I won't be deceived or take responsibility for someone else's child. I've made it clear to her that I'd only consider reconciliation if we divorced and I gained full custody of the children. Obtaining 100% custody is my main goal now. With that, if she continues her relationship with her partner and complications arise, I'll have full control, and she'll be able to move on. Furthermore, I'm still active on dating apps. I won't deactivate them until I'm certain she's not seeing anyone else. Additionally, just yesterday, I felt youthful and alive. There wasn't a clear reason for my happiness, but it gave my self-esteem a boost. I usually find myself attracted to people who are a bit too tough for me. I'm sure many of you can relate to my experiences, knowing it's often an uphill battle. But I feel compelled to keep trying for the sake of my children. Yet, I'm incredibly puzzled when she says she was unhappy after our separation. It's hard to reconcile that with her actions, especially when she cheated on me and left our children for someone else. If I were younger, I might have reacted with more anger, but now I'm contemplating the possibility of reconciling with my father, despite our different problem-solving approaches. I hope this decision will lead to a positive outcome, but I'm uncertain about the future. To the best of my knowledge, there's no indication that she's pregnant, and there's no reason to suspect it. Although she appeared hesitant, she has agreed to 100% custody if we reconcile. She insists she's no longer involved with the affair partner or anyone else. But at this stage, it's challenging for me to trust her fully. We exchange apologies through text messages, and we haven't managed to have a one-on-one conversation without the children present. She's expressed regret for seeking confirmation from someone else, but hasn't directly apologized for the betrayal itself. Until she explicitly admits remorse for the betrayal, I will assume she doesn't regret it. On a positive note, she has agreed to attend couples therapy, which is a significant step, given her previous resistance to therapy. This was one of the reasons I hesitated to seek help for my post-traumatic stress disorder. I understand that significant challenges lie ahead, as my heart is still mending. But I'm determined to rebuild my family, no matter the difficulties. I sincerely make this commitment. While she may have broken her vow, I continue to hold firm to the vows I've made throughout my life. Reflecting on what I miss and cherish, I genuinely miss her unwavering dedication to caring for our children. Her caring and affectionate nature made her an exceptional mother for our daughter. I also appreciate her witty and sarcastic humor. The way she pronounces my name holds a special place in my heart, as does her unique fragrance. Her look when I'm about to make a foolish decision fills me with affection. Her belief that I'm an excellent cook brings me joy. Additionally, her ability to be kind and harmonious with others is truly admirable. Ultimately, I'm captivated by her determination to tackle unfamiliar concepts, even if she doesn't fully understand them. I realize how much I value her uniqueness, which aligns with my own. I deeply miss her presence and wholeheartedly apologize for past mistakes. If we end up in court together, the best outcome I can hope for is shared custody with her having overnight visits every weekend. However, my top priority is obtaining full custody of our children. I fully accept the responsibility for any potential setbacks, but 100% custody would provide me with peace of mind, knowing I've done everything in my power. Even with my attempts at reconciliation, I understand the importance of securing the best future for our children. I consistently felt anxiety, realizing that I was only being used as a means for her to see the children. Despite this, she visited the children only a few times and never took care of them for extended periods. I naively hoped that she could become the same mother she was to our children, but she didn't fulfill the role of a mother. Instead, she appeared as someone who feels guilty from time to time and wishes to visit the life I've built. Currently, we are not officially divorced since she filed for divorce last June, and I filed my response. Since then, I haven't received any updates from the court. I decided to wait before taking any further action because in my state, if a parent leaves and doesn't contact their children for a year, they can be accused of child abandonment. In my view, that's exactly what happened, and I hope the lawyer and the judge will agree, granting me sole custody. My dilemma is that she's trying to get better. She shows a desire to visit the children, especially our son, but seems to have refused to rebuild her relationship with her daughter. While I understand that change takes time, it's challenging for me to trust her actions and decisions. None of the above questions relate to our romantic relationship. Should I wait for a court message or take the initiative to consult with a lawyer and file a claim for termination of parental rights, seeking sole custody? If I decide to seek legal assistance, I'll be committed to taking significant steps. I must admit I acted naively, trusting this woman for so long. I genuinely believe that people have inherent goodness. Even if someone stumbles and loses their way, it doesn't mean they are entirely lost. Should I distance myself from my spouse to shield our children from additional trauma? Thankfully, my life with the children is going well. I receive online counseling at a local veterans rehabilitation center, which greatly helps me cope with post-traumatic stress disorder. Recognizing the difficulties my daughter faces, I arranged for her to meet with a counselor provided by her. Unfortunately, my little boy, at the age of 2, still misses his mother and occasionally asks about her. To comfort him, I explain that she's at work when she's not around. It takes him some time to get comfortable with her presence. I'm concerned that her continuous involvement in his life at this crucial stage might exacerbate his future problems and difficulties. Every morning we have a lovely ritual of reading and singing children's songs. Throughout the day, we engage in fun activities until his sister returns home. It's a joy to witness his progress. Every day he learns a new word, and overall, he radiates genuine happiness. In anticipation of potential consequences of abandonment at his age, I'm teaching him soothing techniques like breathing exercises and engaging hand games. As for me, I've dared to explore dating apps and met several potential partners. But I understand that I'm not yet ready for a serious relationship. For now, I take solace in focusing on my personal growth, dedicating time to exercise and therapy. I handle the upbringing and care of my children solo, even though full custody comes with some downsides. I don't expect to receive alimony from my ex-spouse, which, although I wouldn't mind, would certainly help financially. Another issue is my son possibly holding a grudge against me for not letting his mother in and not providing her with assistance. But I believe it's in the children's best interest for this dishonest and mentally unwell woman to be absent from our lives. Now, 7 months have passed. The divorce process was lengthy and painful, during which my ex-wife caused herself physical bad influence and had a long recovery. But ultimately, I've cut this woman out of my life and the lives of my children. I received a court order preventing her from approaching me and the children. She is currently in a mental health facility, and I'm doing everything I can to ensure my children lead happy lives and move on from the negative impact of their mother.